Hello and welcome. Do you want to successfully complete the C100 Objective Assessment exam? Then you are in the right place. Our website provides a list of questions and answers for your success in the C100 OA exam for free. We understand that acing your OA exam can be quite challenging. That's why we provide completely free exam guides and practice questions for you. In this video, we will cover questions from Humanities purpose, heroic monomyth, classical philosophy, Greek democracy, Roman architecture. So, let's get started.
1. A student argues that studying the humanities is only about memorizing historical dates and famous artworks created in the distant past. Based on what you have learned in the course materials, which response best captures the true underlying purpose of humanities study? A. Memorizing dates of artistic movements. B. Cataloguing famous artworks by region. C. Understanding the human condition culturally. D. Predicting future scientific discoveries. Do you know the answer? Correct answer. C. Understanding the human condition culturally. Explanation. Option C is correct because the humanities seek to understand what it means to be human from a cultural, historical, and artistic perspective, not merely cataloguing dates or artworks. Option A is incorrect because while chronology helps trace cause and effect in history, the primary purpose of the humanities goes far beyond merely memorizing dates of artistic movements or historical events. Option B is incorrect because cataloguing artworks is merely an organizational activity that does not address the deeper purpose of studying human beliefs, values, and the shared human experience across cultures. Option D is incorrect because predicting scientific discoveries belongs to the domain of the sciences, whereas the humanities focus on understanding human beliefs, cultural values, and artistic expressions throughout history. Alright, let's break down what the humanities are actually about, because this question is testing whether you understand the real purpose behind the entire field. A lot of students walk into this course thinking the humanities are just about memorizing dates. When was the Renaissance? When did Beethoven compose his Fifth Symphony? That kind of thing. But that misses the point entirely. The humanities exist to help us understand the human condition from a cultural, historical, and artistic perspective. It's about asking the big questions. What does it mean to be human? What do we value? How do we express those values through art and literature and philosophy? That's why option C is the correct answer. Option A, memorizing dates, is just an organizational tool. It helps you keep a timeline straight, but it's not the purpose of studying the humanities. Option B, cataloguing artworks by region, is basically a filing system. Useful for a museum database, not for understanding why humans create art in the first place. And option D, predicting scientific discoveries, belongs to the sciences, not the humanities at all. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When you see a question asking about the purpose or goal of humanities study, look for the answer that talks about understanding human experience and culture, not memorizing facts or organizing data. Quick recall hook. Humanities equals humans. The whole field is about understanding us. 2. A professional working in healthcare wants to understand why studying the humanities could truly benefit her career in patient care and medical ethics. Based on the course materials, which concept best explains how the humanities intersect with the healthcare professions? A. Social responsibility and empathy. B. Technical knowledge of medicines. C. Statistical analysis of patient data. D. Laboratory research techniques. Do you know the answer? Correct answer. A. Social responsibility and empathy. Explanation. Option A is correct because the humanities intersect with the health professions through exploring empathy, ethical theories, informed consent, and fundamental questions about what constitutes a socially responsible effort. Option B is incorrect because technical knowledge of medicines falls under scientific training and pharmacology, which are entirely separate from the cultural and ethical exploration that the humanities bring to healthcare practice. Option C is incorrect because statistical analysis of patient data is a research methodology skill and not a humanities concept, and it does not address the ethical and empathetic dimensions described in the course. Option D is incorrect because laboratory research techniques are scientific practices used in clinical settings, whereas the humanities contribute to healthcare by fostering empathy, ethical reasoning, and culturally sensitive patient care. Now let's look at how the humanities connect to healthcare, because this one trips students up who assume the humanities only belong in English or art departments. The question is asking why a healthcare professional would benefit from studying the humanities, and the answer is social responsibility and empathy. Option A. Think about it this way: a doctor can know every drug interaction in the book, but if they can't empathise with a frightened patient or navigate an ethical dilemma about end-of-life care, they're missing something critical. The humanities bring that missing piece. They teach you how to think about ethics, informed consent, cultural sensitivity, and what it means to be socially responsible. Option B, technical knowledge of medicines, is pharmacology, pure science. Option C, statistical analysis, is a research methodology. Option D, lab techniques, is clinical science. None of those are humanities. They're all important, sure, but none of them teach you how to sit across from a patient and actually understand what they're going through. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When you see humanities paired with a professional field like healthcare, the connection is always through empathy, ethics, and social responsibility, never through technical or scientific skills. Quick recall hook. Humanities in healthcare equals the heart of care, empathy and ethics, not equipment and experiments. 3. E.O. Wilson coined the term consilience to describe a powerful approach to advancing human knowledge and understanding across fields. If a university program deliberately blended humanities study with information technology research methods, which term best describes that integrated approach? A. Specialization in one discipline. B. Elimination of arts education. C. Separation of academic departments. D. Consilience across disciplines. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer, D. Consilience across disciplines. Explanation. Option D is correct because Wilson defined consilience as the jumping together of knowledge by linking facts and fact-based theory across disciplines to create a common groundwork of explanation. Option A is incorrect because consilience specifically opposes narrow specialization in a single field by encouraging the synthesis of knowledge across different fields, linking the humanities with sciences and technology disciplines. Option B is incorrect because consilience actively promotes including arts and humanities education alongside other academic fields, not eliminating them, as Wilson believed that cross-disciplinary integration enhances human understanding overall. Option C is incorrect because separating academic departments directly contradicts consilience, which seeks to unite different areas of study by finding important overlaps and commonalities between seemingly different subject areas. This is a great concept to know for the exam: consilience. E.O. Wilson coined this term to describe what happens when you take knowledge from completely different fields and blend them together. The word literally means jumping together. So when a university program combines humanities study with information technology research, that's consilience in action. Option D. It's the opposite of staying in your lane. Wilson argued that real breakthroughs happen when disciplines stop ignoring each other and start finding common ground. Option A, specialization, is exactly what consilience pushes against. Staying locked into one narrow field misses the connections. Option B, elimination of arts education, is absurd in this context. Consilience wants more integration, not less. Option C, separating departments, is the structural version of the same problem, putting up walls between fields when consilience wants to tear them down. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When you see a question about blending or integrating multiple academic fields, the keyword you want is consilience. If the question mentions E.O. Wilson, that's your confirmation. Quick recall hook. Consilience equals coming together. C and C. Different fields jumping together to create something bigger. 4. Throughout this course, certain themes appear in 2 or more historical periods, rather than being confined to just one single era of Western civilization. Which set of 3 recurring themes has historically required revisiting and reimagining across multiple periods of Western cultural development? A. Religion, feudalism and monarchy. B. Individualism, revolution and classicism. C. Technology, globalism and economics. D. Science, astronomy and mathematics. Do you know the answer? Correct answer. B. Individualism, revolution and classicism. Explanation. Option B is correct because the course identifies individualism, revolution and classicism as 3 themes that are powerful enough to endure through tumultuous change and creative innovation across multiple historical periods. Option A is incorrect because while religion and feudalism were important in specific periods, like the Middle Ages, they are not identified as the 3 recurring themes spanning multiple eras. Option C is incorrect because technology, globalism and economics are largely modern concerns and are not identified in the course materials as the 3 themes that have historically required revisiting across periods. Option D is incorrect because science, astronomy and mathematics are academic disciplines rather than the recurring humanistic themes that the course identifies as spanning multiple historical periods of Western civilization. Let's talk about the recurring themes of Western civilization, because this question tests whether you can identify which ideas kept showing up across multiple historical periods. The correct answer is option B, individualism, revolution, and classicism. These 3 themes are like threads running through the entire tapestry of Western culture. Individualism keeps resurfacing, from Greek humanism to Renaissance self-expression to Enlightenment personal liberty. Revolution pops up whenever people challenge the existing order. Political revolutions, artistic revolutions, intellectual revolutions. And classicism is the repeated return to Greek and Roman ideals in art, architecture, and thought. Option A mentions religion, feudalism, and monarchy, which were huge during the Middle Ages but aren't the 3 recurring themes identified across all periods. Option C, technology, globalism, economics. Those are mostly modern concerns and weren't recurring across ancient and medieval periods. Option D, science, astronomy, mathematics. Those are academic disciplines, not the humanistic themes the course tracks across eras. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question asks about themes that recur across multiple periods, think IRC, individualism, revolution, classicism. These are the big 3 that keep coming back. Quick recall hook. IRC, like an internet relay chat, connects people across distances. These 3 themes connect across time periods. 5. A medieval tapestry was originally created as political propaganda, celebrating a famous military victory over a rival nation. Centuries later, modern scholars now value it primarily for what it reveals about historical clothing and armour designs. Which concept does this scenario best illustrate? A. Art functions can increase over time. B. Art always serves a single purpose. C. Political art loses all original meaning. D. Historical artifacts replace artistic value. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer. A. Art functions can increase over time. Explanation. Option A is correct because the course explains that art functions can increase in number over time, using the Bayeux Tapestry as an example of propaganda that later gained value as a historical artifact. Option B is incorrect because the course explicitly states that most artworks have multiple functions, and a single artwork's functions can grow rather than remain limited to just one purpose forever. Option C is incorrect because political art does not lose its original meaning when gaining new functions. The Bayeux Tapestry still serves as political propaganda while also functioning as a historical artifact. Option D is incorrect because historical artifact value does not replace artistic value. Instead, the two coexist as the artwork accumulates additional functions and significance over the passage of time. This question gets at a really interesting idea: the fact that art doesn't stay frozen in one role forever. The scenario describes a medieval tapestry that started as political propaganda, celebrating a military victory. Centuries later, scholars value it for what it reveals about historical clothing and armour. This is the Bayeux Tapestry the course talks about, and the concept here is that art functions can increase over time. Option A, the tapestry didn't stop being propaganda, it just picked up an additional function as a historical artifact. That's the key insight. Functions accumulate, they don't replace each other. Option B says art always serves a single purpose, which is exactly wrong. Most artworks have multiple functions. Option C claims political art loses all original meaning, but it doesn't. The Bayeux Tapestry is still recognised as propaganda, even while scholars study its historical details. Option D says historical value replaces artistic value, but that's not how it works either. Both values coexist. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes an artwork gaining new significance or uses over time, the answer is that art functions increase. They stack up, they don't swap out. Quick recall hook: art functions add up. A plus A, they accumulate, never subtract. 6. Joseph Campbell popularised the idea that hero stories across virtually all cultures follow fundamentally the same trajectory and narrative arc. A student studying mythology from 5 different continents notices this same heroic pattern repeated everywhere. Which term best describes this shared narrative structure? A. Polytheistic tradition. B. Lyric poetry form. C. Classical humanism framework. D. The monomyth concept. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer: D. The monomyth concept. Explanation. Option D is correct because the monomyth describes the fundamentally same trajectory of the hero's quest or journey found across virtually every culture. Option A is incorrect because polytheistic tradition refers to belief in multiple gods, which is a religious concept rather than the narrative structure that describes the universal trajectory of hero stories. Option B is incorrect because lyric poetry is a literary form focused on personal emotions and everyday subjects, not the cross-cultural narrative structure that underlies hero stories across all societies. Option C is incorrect because classical humanism is a broad philosophical focus on human achievement and individual potential, not the specific narrative pattern that describes the universal hero's journey across cultures. Joseph Campbell's monomyth is one of those concepts that once you learn it, you start seeing it everywhere. Campbell studied hero stories from cultures all around the world and found that they all follow the same basic narrative arc. A hero gets called to adventure, faces trials, reaches some kind of transformation, and returns changed. You see it in ancient Greek myths, in African folk tales, in Native American legends, in Star Wars. The term for this shared narrative structure is the monomyth, option D. It literally means one myth, the idea that there's one fundamental hero story underneath all the cultural variations. Option A, polytheistic tradition, is about worshipping multiple gods. That's a religious concept, not a narrative structure. Option B, lyric poetry, is a literary form focused on personal emotions. It doesn't describe cross-cultural hero patterns. Option C, classical humanism, is about centering human potential and achievement. It's a philosophical framework, not a story pattern. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions Joseph Campbell, universal hero stories, or the same narrative pattern across cultures, the answer is monomyth. Campbell and monomyth are basically glued together in this course. Quick recall hook. Mono means one. Monomyth equals one myth shared by all cultures. 7. A literature professor explains that Beowulf could swim carrying 20 suits of metal armour and hold his breath for 7 days, making him impossible for ordinary people to relate to directly. Which heroic type does Beowulf best represent based on these superhuman characteristics? A. The romantic hero devoted to chivalry. B. The epic hero with supernatural powers. C. The modern everyday hero of sacrifice. D. The tragic hero with a fatal flaw. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer, B. The epic hero with supernatural powers. Explanation. Option B is correct because the epic hero, like Beowulf, Achilles, and Gilgamesh, is larger than life with supernatural abilities that far exceed what any normal person could ever achieve. Option A is incorrect because the romantic hero represents devotion to a code like chivalry and is exceptional but attainable, unlike the epic hero whose supernatural powers place him beyond any ordinary reach. Option C is incorrect because the modern everyday hero has nothing exceptional about them initially and becomes heroic through responding to circumstances, which is the opposite of Beowulf's supernatural abilities. Option D is incorrect because while tragic heroes appear in classical theatre with fatal flaws, the heroic type classification described in the course focuses on epic, romantic, and modern categories specifically. Let's talk about hero types because this course breaks them into 3 categories, and the exam loves testing whether you know which is which. The question describes Beowulf, a character who could swim carrying 20 suits of armour and hold his breath for 7 days. That's not humanly possible, right? These are supernatural powers. That makes Beowulf an epic hero. Option B. The epic hero is larger than life, operating on a level that no real person could ever reach. Think Beowulf, Achilles, Gilgamesh. These guys aren't just strong or brave, they're essentially superhuman. Option A, the romantic hero, is someone devoted to a code like chivalry. A romantic hero is exceptional, maybe the best knight in the kingdom, but still within the realm of what a person could theoretically become. Option C, the modern everyday hero, is the opposite of Beowulf, someone ordinary who steps up in a crisis. Nothing supernatural about them at all. Option D, the tragic hero, is from theatre. A character with a fatal flaw, but that's a different classification system from the epic, romantic, and modern breakdown the course uses. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes supernatural or impossible abilities, the answer is epic hero. If the hero is admirable but achievable, that's romantic. If the hero is an ordinary person rising to the occasion, that's modern. Quick recall hook. Epic equals extreme. If the powers are beyond human, it's epic. 8. Using the comic book comparison from the course materials, Batman represents justice and possesses special resources but remains someone a person could arguably become. A brave firefighter who rushes into a burning building to save strangers best represents which heroic category? A. The modern everyday hero. B. The romantic hero of ideals. C. The epic hero of legend. D. The classical tragic hero. Do you know the answer? Correct answer, A. The modern everyday hero. Explanation. Option A is correct, because the modern or everyday hero is someone ordinary who becomes heroic through their response to circumstances, such as rushing into danger to sacrifice for others. Option B is incorrect because the romantic hero is the best among people and represents devotion to a particular ideal or code, like the medieval knight devoted to chivalry, not an ordinary person acting heroically. Option C is incorrect because the epic hero possesses supernatural powers and abilities that extend far beyond any normal person, making legendary figures like Gilgamesh and Beowulf fundamentally different from ordinary firefighters. Option D is incorrect because the classical tragic hero is a theatrical character type defined by a central flaw like hubris, not a category in the three-part heroic type classification discussed in the course. This question is basically the flip side of the Beowulf question. Now we're looking at the other end of the hero spectrum, the modern, everyday hero. A firefighter rushing into a burning building to save strangers isn't supernatural. They don't have special powers or a legendary code of chivalry. They're an ordinary person who becomes heroic through their response to a dangerous situation. That's option A, the modern everyday hero. The course even uses a great comic book comparison to make this stick. Superman is the epic hero. Powers no human could have. Batman is the romantic hero. Exceptional, devoted to justice, has special resources, but you could arguably become Batman if you were rich and dedicated enough. The firefighter? That's the person next door who steps up when it matters. Option B, the romantic hero, requires devotion to an ideal or code, and being exceptional among people. That's more Batman or a medieval knight. Option C, the epic hero, requires supernatural abilities. The firefighter is brave, not superhuman. Option D, the classical tragic hero, is a theatrical concept about characters with fatal flaws, not part of this three-way classification. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When the question describes an ordinary person acting heroically in response to circumstances, not because of special powers or a lifelong code, the answer is modern everyday hero. Quick recall hook, modern equals me. Could I theoretically be this hero? Yes? Then it's modern. 9. The ancient Greeks distinguished between two fundamental forms of love that gave artists and philosophers a powerful framework for exploring the duality of human affection throughout their culture. Which pair of terms correctly identifies this Greek distinction between physical passion and selfless spiritual love? A. Agape and hubris. B. Mythos and logos. C. Eros and agape. D. Pathos and ethos. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer, C. Eros and agape. Explanation: option C is correct because the ancient Greeks developed the distinction between eros, meaning erotic or physical love, and agape, meaning platonic or selfless spiritual love of another person. Option A is incorrect because while agape is correctly identified as one form of love, hubris means excessive pride or arrogance, and is a concept from Greek theatre, not a category of love. Option B is incorrect because mythos refers to traditional stories or myths, and logos refers to reasoned discourse or logic. Neither term is part of the Greek classification of types of love. Option D is incorrect because pathos relates to emotional appeal or suffering, and ethos relates to character or credibility in rhetoric. These are persuasion concepts, not categories of Greek love. The ancient Greeks were incredibly precise about language, and their distinction between types of love is a perfect example. They didn't lump all love into one word the way English does. They separated physical, passionate love, eros, from selfless spiritual love, agape. Eros is where we get the word erotic. It's desire, attraction, physical passion. Agape is the opposite end, unconditional love, the kind where you care about someone's well-being without expecting anything back. The correct answer is option C, eros and agape. Now, the wrong answers try to trick you by mixing Greek terms from completely different categories. Option A pairs agape with hubris, but hubris means excessive pride. the kind of arrogance that causes a tragic hero's downfall. That's from Greek theatre, not from their classification of love. Option B offers mythos and logos, which are about storytelling versus logical reasoning, nothing to do with love at all. Option D gives you pathos and ethos, which are tools of persuasion in rhetoric. Pathos is emotional appeal, and ethos is credibility. Again, no connection to love. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When you see a question about Greek types of love, you need eros and agape as a pair. If one of those words is paired with something from a different category, hubris, logos, pathos, that option is wrong. Quick recall hook. Eros equals erotic. Agape equals angel-like love. E for E, A for A. 10. In medieval literature, courtly romance often depicted a young unmarried knight pursuing a beautiful married woman whose older jealous husband had locked her away in a tower. Which real historical figure's life circumstances are credited with directly inspiring this literary tradition of courtly romance? A. Queen Victoria of England. B. Aphrodite, the goddess of love. C. Sappho, the Greek lyric poet. D. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer, D. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Explanation. Option D is correct because Eleanor of Aquitaine, wife of Henry II and Queen of England, was essentially confined by her husband and became a great patron of the arts, encouraging courtly romance. You know. Option A is incorrect because Queen Victoria lived during the 19th century Victorian era, which is many centuries after the 12th century emergence of courtly romance literature during the medieval period. Option B is incorrect because Aphrodite is a mythological goddess of love from Greek polytheism, not a real historical figure whose life circumstances could have directly inspired medieval courtly romance traditions. Option C is incorrect because Sappho was an ancient Greek lyric poet who wrote about personal emotions like love and desire, but she lived centuries before the medieval period when courtly romance developed. Courtly romance is one of those literary traditions that sounds like pure fantasy until you realise it was based on a real person's life. The tradition typically features a young unmarried knight pursuing a beautiful married woman whose older jealous husband has locked her away. That real person was Eleanor of Aquitaine. Option D. Eleanor was the wife of Henry II and Queen of England, and her husband essentially confined her. She became a major patron of the arts and encouraged the development of courtly romance literature. The troubadour poets who wrote these stories were directly influenced by her court and her circumstances. Option A, Queen Victoria, lived in the 19th century. That's about 700 years too late for medieval courtly romance. Option B, Aphrodite, is a mythological goddess, not a real historical figure who could directly inspire a literary tradition. Option C, Sappho, was a real Greek poet who wrote about love and desire, but she lived in ancient Greece, many centuries before the medieval period when courtly romance emerged. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When you see courtly romance, think Eleanor of Aquitaine. She's the historical figure the course directly links to this tradition. No one else in the options is from the right time period or the right circumstances. Quick recall hook. Eleanor equals elegant love locked away. A queen confined by her husband, inspiring stories of knights rescuing imprisoned ladies. 11. A philosophy student reads that Aristotle taught his students to find the desirable middle ground between two extremes of any character trait. For example, the balanced midpoint between arrogance and insecurity is healthy self-confidence. Which important philosophical concept does this teaching represent? A. The golden mean. B. The Socratic method. C. The allegory of the cave. D. The theory of forms. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer, A. The golden mean. Explanation. Option A is correct because the golden mean is Aristotle's concept that individuals create virtuous character by achieving balance between too much of a trait and too little of a trait. Option B is incorrect because the Socratic method is an approach to problem solving developed by Socrates that uses persistent questioning and open discussion, not a theory about balancing character traits. Option C is incorrect because the allegory of the cave is Plato's metaphor, explaining how most people live in ignorance and can only discover truth through difficult reflection. Option D is incorrect because the theory of forms is Plato's belief that ideal essences exist beyond the physical world and can only be grasped through reasoning, not through balancing personality traits. Aristotle's golden mean is one of those concepts that sounds simple but runs deep. The idea is that virtue lives in the middle ground between two extremes. Take courage. Too much of it and you're reckless. Too little and you're a coward. The sweet spot in the middle is where genuine courage lives. The question gives us arrogance on one end, insecurity on the other, and healthy self-confidence in the middle. That's the golden mean in action. Option A. Aristotle believed you build virtuous character by actively finding this balance, not by accident, but through practice and reason. Option B, the Socratic method, is Socrates' approach to learning through relentless questioning. It's a teaching method, not a theory, about balancing character traits. Option C, the allegory of the cave, is Plato's metaphor about ignorance and truth. Prisoners watching shadows on a wall. Completely different concept. Option D, the theory of forms, is also Plato's idea that perfect, ideal versions of things exist beyond our physical world. Nothing to do with finding the middle of personality traits. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions balance between two extremes, or finding a desirable middle ground in character traits, that's the golden mean. Aristotle and balance go hand in hand. Quick recall hook. Golden mean equals Goldilocks. Not too much, not too little, just right. 12. Athens is commonly credited as the birthplace of a revolutionary form of government, in which citizens voted directly on every law and every public office, rather than electing representatives to make decisions for them. Which form of government does this describe? A. Constitutional monarchy. B. Feudal aristocracy. C. Direct democracy. D. Military dictatorship. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer, C. Direct democracy. Explanation: option C is correct, because Athens established the first direct democracy, where citizens voted on every law and public office themselves rather than electing representatives to act on their behalf. Option A is incorrect because a constitutional monarchy places a king or queen as head of state with powers limited by a constitution, which does not describe the Athenian system of citizen participation. Option B is incorrect because feudal aristocracy describes the medieval system where wealthy landowners held most of the power, which is fundamentally different from citizens directly voting on laws and public offices. Option D is incorrect because a military dictatorship concentrates all governing power in a single military leader, which directly contradicts the Athenian democratic principle of distributing decision-making power among all citizens. Athens and democracy. This one is pretty foundational. The question describes a system where citizens voted directly on every law and every public office rather than electing representatives. That's direct democracy, option C. What made Athens revolutionary was that ordinary citizens didn't just elect leaders who then made decisions for them. The citizens themselves were the decision makers. They showed up, debated, and voted on every issue directly. That's different from what most modern democracies do, which is representative democracy. You vote for a senator or a member of parliament who then votes on laws for you. Athens cut out the middleman. Option A, constitutional monarchy, puts a king or queen in charge with limits set by a constitution. Nothing like citizen self-governance. Option B, feudal aristocracy, is the medieval system where wealthy landowners held power. the exact opposite of distributed citizen voting. Option D, military dictatorship, concentrates power in one military leader. About as far from democratic participation as you can get. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When the question specifies that citizens voted directly on laws rather than electing representatives, the keyword is direct democracy. If it said citizens elected representatives, that would be representative democracy. The word directly is your signal. Quick recall hook. Athens equals all citizens vote directly. Direct democracy means direct participation, no middlemen. 13. Both ancient Greek and Roman civilizations worship many of the same deities, though often under different names. For example, Zeus was known as Jupiter and Aphrodite was known as Venus. Which term correctly describes this type of religious belief system? A. Monotheism with a single deity. B. Deism based on natural reason. C. Atheism rejecting all divine beings. D. Polytheism with multiple gods. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer, D. Polytheism with multiple gods. Explanation: Option D is correct because both Greek and Roman cultures practiced polytheism, meaning they worshipped many gods representing different facets of life, including Zeus and Jupiter as king of gods. Option A is incorrect because monotheism refers to belief in a single deity, which describes religions like Judaism and Christianity, not the multi-deity worship systems practiced by ancient Greeks and Romans. Option B is incorrect because deism is a later philosophical position, emphasizing natural reason, and a non-interventionist creator, which does not describe the active, personal gods of Greek and Roman religion. Option C is incorrect because atheism is the rejection of all divine beings, which is the opposite of the deeply religious polytheistic cultures where Greeks and Romans worshipped thousands of gods. This one tests whether you know your religious terminology. The question tells you that both Greeks and Romans worshipped many gods under different names. Zeus was Jupiter, Aphrodite was Venus. When a culture worships multiple gods, that's polytheism way. Option D, poly means many. Theism means belief in gods. Both Greek and Roman cultures had massive pantheons of deities, covering everything from love to war to agriculture. Option A, monotheism, is the belief in a single deity. That's Judaism, Christianity, Islam. The exact opposite of what's being described. Option B, deism, is a philosophical position from much later in history, where a creator exists but doesn't actively intervene in the world. Nothing like the very active, very personal Greek and Roman gods who are constantly meddling in human affairs. Option C, atheism, is the rejection of all divine beings, the complete opposite of cultures that worshipped hundreds of gods. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. Know your prefixes. Poly equals many, mono equals one, A equals without. If a question describes multiple gods in a culture, the answer is polytheism every time. Quick recall hook. Poly equals plenty of gods. Polytheism means plenty of deities. 14. Greek philosophers boldly questioned whether their gods acted justly, demanding that mythological stories conform to human standards of right and wrong. Sculptors simultaneously sought to represent the human form with unprecedented accuracy and beauty. Which theme connects these philosophical and artistic pursuits? A. Polytheistic devotion to divine authority. B. Democratic reform of political systems. C. Humanism centered on human potential. D. Rationalism rejecting all artistic beauty. Do you know the answer? Correct answer, C. Humanism centered on human potential. Explanation. Option C is correct because classical humanism placed the human at the center of every endeavor, from philosophers demanding moral gods to sculptors innovating techniques to represent human beauty. Option A is incorrect because questioning whether gods act justly actually challenges divine authority rather than demonstrating devotion to it, making polytheistic devotion an inaccurate description of this intellectual movement. Option B is incorrect because while democracy was certainly an important classical theme, the specific activities described involve philosophical questioning of myths and artistic representation of humans, not governmental reform. Option D is incorrect because rationalism and artistic beauty were not in opposition during the classical period. Rather, reason was used alongside aesthetic pursuits to celebrate human capabilities and potential. This question asks what connects two specific Greek activities: philosophers questioning whether their gods acted justly, and sculptors trying to represent the human body with unprecedented beauty and accuracy. Both activities put humans at the centre. The philosophers were saying, our gods should meet our moral standards. The sculptors were saying, the human form is worth perfecting in stone. That shared focus on human potential and achievement is humanism. Option C. Classical humanism was the driving intellectual force of ancient Greece, and it placed human beings at the centre of philosophical, artistic, and political life. Option A, polytheistic devotion, doesn't fit because questioning whether gods act justly is actually challenging divine authority, not showing devotion to it. Option B, democratic reform, is an important Greek concept, but this question is specifically about philosophical questioning and artistic representation, not about changing government. Option D, rationalism rejecting artistic beauty, gets it backward. The Greeks used reason alongside their pursuit of beauty, not against it. Here's a WGUC 100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes Greeks placing humans at the centre, whether through philosophy, art, or ethics, the answer is humanism. Human-centred activity equals humanism. Quick recall hook: humanism equals humans at the centre of everything. Greeks put us first. 15. When you look at the United States Capitol building and the Supreme Court building in Washington, you can see columns, symmetrical designs, and architectural elements borrowed directly from ancient Greek and Roman structures. Which classical buildings most directly inspired these American government structures? A. The Parthenon and the Pantheon. B. The Colosseum and Circus Maximus. C. The Acropolis walls and Roman roads. D. Egyptian pyramids and Greek temples. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer: A. The Parthenon and the Pantheon. Explanation. Option A is correct because the United States Capitol and Supreme Court buildings were directly inspired by ancient Greek and Roman styles seen in the Parthenon and Pantheon. Option B is incorrect because the Colosseum was a massive amphitheatre for public spectacles, and the Circus Maximus was a chariot racing stadium, neither of which inspired American government building designs. Option C is incorrect because the Acropolis walls and Roman roads are infrastructure elements rather than architectural models, and they did not serve as direct inspiration for the design of American government buildings. Option D is incorrect because while Egyptian art influenced Greek sculpture proportions, the Greek Parthenon and the Roman Pantheon are the direct inspirations for American governmental architecture. If you've ever looked at the US Capitol or the Supreme Court building and thought they looked like they belonged in ancient Greece or Rome, you're not wrong. Those buildings were directly inspired by two classical structures, the Greek Parthenon and the Roman Pantheon. That's option A. The Parthenon sits on the Acropolis in Athens and the Pantheon stands in Rome, and both feature the columns, symmetry, and architectural grandeur that American architects copied for government buildings. The message was deliberate. The new American Republic wanted to connect itself visually to the democratic and republican traditions of the ancient world. Option B, the Colosseum and Circus Maximus, were entertainment venues, an amphitheatre for gladiator fights, and a stadium for chariot races. They didn't inspire government building design. Option C, Acropolis walls and Roman roads, are infrastructure. defensive walls and transportation networks, not architectural models for civic buildings. Option D mentions Egyptian pyramids and Greek temples together, but while Egyptian art influenced Greek sculpture proportions, the course specifically names the Parthenon and Pantheon as the direct inspirations. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you: Parthenon and Pantheon. Those two P words are your answer for American government architecture. If you see columns and symmetry in the question, think double P, quick recall hook. Parthenon plus Pantheon equals American power buildings. The two Ps built the look of American government. 16. A professor leads her class by posing a question about justice. When students answer, she responds with more probing questions that expose weaknesses in their reasoning, continuing until stronger ideas emerge. Which philosophical method is she using in this classroom exercise? A. Aristotle's observational approach. B. Machiavelli's political treatise method. C. Plato's theory of ideal forms. D. The Socratic method of inquiry. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer: D. The Socratic method of inquiry. Explanation: Option D is correct because the Socratic method employs persistent questioning and open discussion to eliminate weak ideas and uncover stronger, more viable hypotheses about abstract concepts like justice. Option A is incorrect because Aristotle's approach was largely observational in nature, studying the natural world and human behaviour through direct observation rather than through a structured pattern of persistent questioning. Option B is incorrect because Machiavelli wrote political treatises using straightforward prose and logical arguments about governance, which is an entirely different method from the Socratic questioning and open discussion approach. Option C is incorrect because Plato's theory of forms concerns ideal essences existing beyond the physical world, which is a philosophical concept rather than an interactive method of teaching through questions. This question is describing the Socratic method in action, and it's about as straightforward as exam questions get. A professor asks a question about justice. Students answer. She responds with more probing questions that expose weaknesses in their reasoning. This keeps going until stronger ideas emerge. That's exactly what Socrates did. He used persistent questioning and open discussion to break down weak ideas and build toward better ones. The answer is option D, the Socratic method. Socrates never just told people the answer. He believed that by asking the right questions, people could discover truth themselves, but only after their bad reasoning had been stripped away. Option A, Aristotle's observational approach, involves studying the natural world through direct observation. Aristotle watched things and categorized them. That's different from a structured back and forth of questioning. Option B, Machiavelli's political treatise method, is about writing political arguments in prose, like The Prince. That's a writing style, not a classroom technique. Option C, Plato's theory of forms, is a philosophical concept about ideal essences existing beyond the physical world. It's a belief system, not a teaching method. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes persistent questioning, probing follow-ups, or discussion that eliminates weak ideas, the answer is always the Socratic method. Quick recall hook. Socrates equals so many questions. The man never stopped asking. 17. In Plato's famous philosophical metaphor, prisoners chained inside a dark space believe that flickering images on the wall represent all of reality. When one prisoner is freed, the journey toward actual sunlight is initially painful and frightening. What does this allegory primarily teach about the pursuit of truth? A. Truth comes easily without effort. B. Sensory experience reveals all reality. C. Reason frees people from illusion. D. Prisoners should remain comfortable. Do you know the answer? Correct answer: C. Reason frees people from illusion. Explanation: Option C is correct because Plato's allegory of the cave teaches that most people live believing in shadows, and only through the difficult use of reason can they be freed to see real truth. Option A is incorrect because Plato specifically emphasized that learning truth requires time, effort, and often painful reflection, making the pursuit of truth anything but easy or effortless for people. Option B is incorrect because the entire point of the allegory is that trusting only our senses traps us in a world of shadows, and we must go beyond sensory experience to find truth. Option D is incorrect because Plato argued the opposite position, stating that despite initial fear and discomfort, emerging from the cave of illusion leads to discovering a much more beautiful and perfect truth. Plato's allegory of the cave is probably the most famous philosophical metaphor in Western history. Picture prisoners chained inside a dark cave their entire lives. All they can see are flickering shadows on the wall, cast by objects passing in front of a fire behind them. They think those shadows are reality because it's all they've ever known. When one prisoner breaks free and stumbles toward the sunlight outside, it's painful and terrifying. The light hurts, the real world is overwhelming. But eventually that freed prisoner sees the world as it truly is. The allegory teaches that most people live in ignorance, trusting their senses, believing in shadows. Only through the difficult use of reason can you break free and see truth. That's option C, reason frees people from illusion. Option A says truth comes easily. Plato said the exact opposite. The journey out of the cave is painful and frightening. Option B claims sensory experience reveals all reality, but Plato's entire point is that our senses trap us in a world of shadows. Option D suggests prisoners should stay comfortable, which goes against everything the allegory stands for. Plato argued that the discomfort of seeking truth is worth it, because what you find outside is infinitely more beautiful and real. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When you see a question about the cave, shadows, prisoners, or moving from darkness to light, the lesson is always that reason frees us from illusion. Truth is hard but worth it. Quick recall hook. Cave equals chains of ignorance. Reason is the key that unlocks them. 18. Plato argued that ordinary people tend to act in their own self-interests unless guided by a wise ruler who makes decisions based on objective truth and fairness. In his ideal state, what type of leader did Plato believe should govern the people? A philosopher king using reason. B, a military general using force. C, a religious priest using faith. D, a wealthy merchant using commerce. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer, A, a philosopher king using reason. Explanation. Option A is correct because Plato believed that a philosopher king who understands the most objective truth and uses reason to make decisions could rule society in the most balanced and just way. Option B is incorrect because Plato's ideal ruler governs through wisdom and reason rather than military force, as understanding truth through philosophy was considered essential for creating a just state. Option C is incorrect because Plato's ideal state separates governance from religious authority and instead centers leadership on philosophical reason and justice. Option D is incorrect because Plato was primarily concerned with virtue and justice rather than commercial wealth, and his philosopher king governs based on understanding truth, not on accumulating economic resources. Plato had some strong opinions about who should be in charge. He looked at ordinary people and said, left to their own devices, most of them will act in pure self-interest. So his solution was a philosopher king, a ruler who understands objective truth and governs through reason, not through force, faith, or money. That's option A. The philosopher king isn't just smart. In Plato's view, this person has grasped the deepest truths about reality and justice through philosophical study. They make decisions based on what's objectively right, not what's popular or personally advantageous. Option B, a military general using force, is leadership through domination. Plato's whole point was that wisdom, not power, should guide governance. Option C, a religious priest using faith, resembles the Egyptian model where the king was divine. Plato specifically separated governance from religious authority and rooted leadership in philosophical reason instead. Option D, a wealthy merchant using commerce, contradicts Plato at a basic level. He was concerned with virtue and justice, not economic gain. Wealth accumulation had nothing to do with his ideal of good governance. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions Plato's ideal ruler, or who should govern, the answer is philosopher king. Plato believed only someone who truly understood truth through reason should hold power. Quick recall hook. Plato's king equals a philosopher. P for P, philosopher king, means wisdom rules. 19. Aristotle believed that what people commonly assume brings happiness, such as wealth and success, does not actually produce genuine fulfillment. Instead, he argued that humans must actively use their unique capacity for reason to pursue something specific. What did Aristotle say was the true path to human happiness? A. Accumulating wealth and influence. B. Activating goodness through reason. C. Achieving fame and public recognition. D. Avoiding all difficult moral choices. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer. B. Activating goodness through reason. Explanation. Option B is correct because Aristotle taught that humans have the potential to be good, but they must activate that potential through reason, since goodness is not a passive condition, but requires observable action. Option A is incorrect because Aristotle specifically stated that what is commonly assumed to bring happiness, including wealth and success, is not what actually makes humans happy or leads to genuine fulfillment. Option C is incorrect because Aristotle focused on achieving goodness through virtuous character and reasoned action, not on pursuing fame or public recognition as the pathway to true human happiness. Option D is incorrect because Aristotle's philosophy requires active engagement with difficult moral choices through reason, not avoidance of them, since finding the golden mean demands both thoughtful and energetic effort. Aristotle had a different take on happiness than most people. He looked at what everyone assumed made people happy: wealth, success, fame, and said, that's not it. Those things don't produce genuine fulfillment. Instead, Aristotle argued that humans have a unique capacity for reason, and happiness comes from using that capacity to actively pursue goodness. The key word here is activate. Aristotle didn't think being a good person was something passive. You don't just exist and happen to be good. You have to use reason to make choices, take action, and practice virtue. Goodness becomes visible through what you actually do. That's option B, activating goodness through reason. Option A, accumulating wealth, is exactly what Aristotle said doesn't bring real happiness. He specifically called this out as a common misconception. Option C, achieving fame and recognition, same problem. Aristotle was focused on internal virtue through action, not external validation from others. Option D, avoiding difficult moral choices, gets it completely backward. Aristotle's philosophy requires you to engage with hard choices, not dodge them. Finding the golden mean demands effort and active reasoning. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions Aristotle and happiness or fulfillment, the answer involves activating goodness through reason. It's about doing, not having. Action, not possession. Quick recall hook. Aristotle says act good, don't just be good. Happiness requires action. 20. Before Socrates, philosophers in the Greek port of Miletus made a revolutionary intellectual breakthrough by investigating the physical nature of the world without relying on their culture's traditional stories about gods. Why was this approach considered a significant break from humankind's past? A. They used mythology to explain nature. B. They followed religious traditions closely. C. They rejected all forms of knowledge. D. They anchored inquiry in observation. Do you know the answer? Correct answer. D. They anchored inquiry in observation. Explanation. Option D is correct because pre-Socratic philosophers anchored their investigations in observation and reason rather than mythology, developing ideas that underlie both Western philosophy and the modern scientific method. Option A is incorrect because using mythology to explain natural phenomena was exactly what previous traditions did, and the pre-Socratic breakthrough was specifically moving away from mythological explanations of nature. Option B is incorrect because following religious traditions closely describes the approach that preceded these philosophers, whose innovation was precisely breaking away from cultural mythologies to explain the physical world. Option C is incorrect because the pre-Socratics did not reject knowledge. Rather, they pursued it through new methods based on observation and reason, making groundbreaking contributions to philosophy and early science. Before Socrates came along, there were philosophers in the Greek port city of Miletus who made a genuinely revolutionary move. Up until that point, if you wanted to explain why it rained or why earthquakes happened, the answer was always about the gods. Zeus was angry. Poseidon shook the earth. The pre-Socratic philosophers said, hold on, let's actually look at the physical world and try to explain it through observation and reason instead of mythology. That was a massive break from everything that came before. They anchored their inquiry in observation. Option D. This approach laid the groundwork for both Western philosophy and the modern scientific method. Option A says they use mythology to explain nature, which is exactly what they stopped doing. That's the tradition they broke away from. Option B, following religious traditions closely, is the same problem. The whole point of their breakthrough was rejecting traditional mythological explanations. Option C, rejecting all forms of knowledge, is wrong because they didn't reject knowledge. They pursued it more aggressively than anyone before them, just through new methods, based on observation instead of stories about gods. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions Miletus, pre-Socratic philosophers, or the shift away from mythology, the answer is observation and reason. They move from myth to method. Quick recall hook. Miletus equals method over myth. M for M. They chose observation over the old stories. 21. In ancient Greek tragedy, the main character is often driven toward a devastating fate by a central personality flaw that causes the events leading to their own downfall. The character frequently discovers the truth too late, resulting in dramatic irony for the audience. Which play best exemplifies this structure? A. Lysistrata by Aristophanes. B. Dr. Faustus by Marlowe. C. Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. D. Hamlet by Shakespeare. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer, C. Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. Explanation. Option C is correct because Oedipus Rex follows a protagonist whose hubris drives him to relentlessly seek truth about his origins, fulfilling the prophecy he tried to avoid through tragic, dramatic irony. Option A is incorrect because Lysistrata is a comedy by Aristophanes about women withholding intimacy to end the Peloponnesian War, which uses humour and satire rather than tragic fate and character flaws. Option B is incorrect because Dr. Faustus is a Renaissance play by Christopher Marlowe about a scholar who sells his soul to the devil, written centuries after the classical Greek theatrical tradition. Option D is incorrect because Hamlet is a Renaissance play by William Shakespeare, exploring revenge and indecision, which was influenced by but is distinct from the original classical Greek tragic tradition. Let's dig into Greek tragedy because this question is testing whether you can match a specific play to the tragic structure. Greek tragedy follows a pattern. A main character has a central personality flaw. That flaw drives them toward destruction. And the audience watches it unfold knowing what the character doesn't. That's dramatic irony. The play that nails this structure is Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. Option C. Oedipus is driven by hubris, an overwhelming arrogance and need to know the truth about his origins. The cruel twist is that by relentlessly seeking the truth, he actually fulfills the very prophecy he was trying to avoid. The audience knows the ending before Oedipus does, and that gap between what the audience knows and what the character knows is dramatic irony at its most powerful. Option A, Lysistrata, is a comedy by Aristophanes. It's about women refusing intimacy with their husbands to end the Peloponnesian War. Funny, satirical, but not tragic at all. Option B, Dr. Faustus, is a Renaissance play by Marlowe about selling your soul to the devil. It has tragic elements, but it was written centuries after the classical Greek tradition. Option D, Hamlet, is Shakespeare. Also Renaissance, also tragic in its own way, but it's a different tradition from the original Greek model being described. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes a fatal flaw driving someone to destruction with dramatic irony and asks for a Greek example, the answer is Oedipus Rex. Hubris plus prophecy plus dramatic irony equals Oedipus every time. Quick recall hook. Oedipus equals, oh no, I did it to myself. His search for truth was the thing that destroyed him. 22. Homer's epic poem. The Odyssey begins with the narrator calling on a divine figure to help tell the story of Odysseus and his long journey home from war. These inspirational goddesses, daughters of Zeus, were associated with poetry and music. What were these divine figures called? A. The Muses of Inspiration. B. The Fates of Destiny. C. The Nymphs of Nature. D. The Sirens of the Sea. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer, A. The Muses of Inspiration. Explanation. Option A is correct because the Muses were daughters of Zeus, goddesses devoted to memory and inspiration, and poets traditionally called on a muse at the beginning of their work for guidance. Option B is incorrect because the Fates were mythological figures associated with determining human destiny and the course of mortal life, not with providing artistic inspiration to poets and musicians in their work. Option C is incorrect because the nymphs were minor supernatural beings associated with nature and natural settings, not the divine inspirational figures that poets invoked at the beginning of their works. Option D is incorrect because the sirens were dangerous creatures who lured travellers to their doom with enchanting songs, functioning as obstacles in stories rather than sources of artistic inspiration. This question is about a tradition in ancient Greek epic poetry, calling on a divine figure for help before you start telling a story. When Homer begins the Odyssey, the narrator invokes a goddess of inspiration to help tell the tale of Odysseus. These divine figures were the Muses. Option A. The Muses were daughters of Zeus, goddesses associated with memory, poetry, and music. Poets would literally begin their works by asking a muse to speak through them, to give them the skill and memory to tell the story properly. It was a standard convention of epic poetry. Option B, the Fates, were about destiny. They determined the course of human life, how long you'd live when you'd die. They had nothing to do with inspiring poets. Option C, the Nymphs, were minor nature spirits associated with forests, rivers, and mountains. They didn't provide artistic inspiration. Option D, the Sirens, were dangerous creatures who lured sailors to their deaths with enchanting songs. They're obstacles in the story, not sources of creative guidance. Here's a WGUC 100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions divine inspiration for poets, daughters of Zeus connected to poetry and music, or the invocation at the beginning of an epic, the answer is the Muses. Quick recall hook. Muses equal music and inspiration. We still use the word muse today to mean a source of creative inspiration. 23. Greek sculptors revolutionized the representation of the human body by creating a natural stance where the figure places weight on one foot, causing the shoulder to dip on one side while the hip rises on the opposite side. Which artistic innovation does this dynamic pose describe? A. Fresco wall painting technique. B. Post and lintel construction. C. Illuminated manuscript design. D. Contrapposto sculptural stance. Do you know the answer? Correct answer. D. Contrapposto sculptural stance. Explanation. Option D is correct because contrapposto is the Greek innovation of a lifelike stance where weight on one foot creates dynamic balance between the dip of a shoulder and rise of the opposite hip. Option A is incorrect because fresco is a painting technique where artists paint on still wet plaster placed on walls, which is a Roman decorative art form rather than a sculptural technique for representing the body. Option B is incorrect because post and lintel is an architectural construction method using two upright posts supporting a horizontal crossbeam, not a sculptural technique for creating natural human body positions. Option C is incorrect because illuminated manuscripts were decorated handwritten texts featuring elaborate painted illustrations, which were a medieval art form rather than a classical Greek sculptural innovation for the body. Greek sculptors figured out something that changed art forever: how to make a stone figure look like it was actually alive. Before contrapposto, statues stood stiff and symmetrical, both feet planted, shoulders level, like mannequins. Then Greek artists invented a pose where the figure shifts weight onto one foot. When you do that, your hip rises on the weight-bearing side and your shoulder dips on the opposite side. It creates this natural, relaxed, dynamic look. That's contrapposto. Option D. The word literally means counterpose in Italian. You see it everywhere once you know what to look for, from ancient Greek sculpture to Michelangelo's David. Option A, fresco, is a painting technique. You paint on wet plaster. That's about walls, not about body poses. Option B, post and lintel, is architecture. Two upright posts with a horizontal beam across the top. Think door frames, not sculpture. Option C, illuminated manuscripts, are decorated handwritten books from the Middle Ages. They have nothing to do with Greek sculpture at all. Here's a WGUC 100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes weight on one foot, a dipped shoulder, a raised hip, or a natural dynamic stance in sculpture, the answer is always contrapposto. Quick recall hook: contrapposto equals counterbalance. The body counters itself. One side up, the other down. 24. Roman architects surpassed the Greeks in building scale by developing the use of arches and pioneering a revolutionary construction material that allowed them to create massive structures like the Pantheon's dome. Which construction innovation gave the Romans this significant architectural advantage? A. Carved marble pillars and columns. B. Concrete as a building material. C. Wooden beam framing systems. D. Stained glass window panels. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer: B. Concrete as a building material. Explanation. Option B is correct because the Romans pioneered the use of concrete, which enabled construction of massive structures like the Pantheon dome and the Colosseum that exceeded Greek architectural limitations. Option A is incorrect because carved marble pillars and columns were already used extensively by the Greeks, so they did not represent a new Roman innovation that expanded the scale of architectural construction. Option C is incorrect because wooden beam framing was a basic construction technique available long before the Romans, and it could not support the massive domed structures that Roman concrete made possible. Option D is incorrect because stained glass window panels became prominent during the medieval period in Gothic cathedrals, not during the Roman classical period, and did not contribute to Roman architectural scale. The Romans were incredible engineers, and the question is asking what gave them their edge over the Greeks in terms of building scale. The answer is concrete, option B. The Romans figured out how to make and use concrete as a building material, and that changed everything. With concrete, they could build structures that were simply impossible with carved stone alone. The Pantheon's massive dome, the Colosseum's towering arches. None of that happens without concrete. It was moldable, strong, and could be formed into curves and domes that stone blocks couldn't achieve. Option A, marble pillars and columns, were a Greek specialty. The Romans used them too, but they weren't a new Roman innovation. Option C, wooden beam framing, is a basic construction technique that existed long before Rome. You can't build a dome like the Pantheon with wooden beams. Option D, stained glass windows, didn't become prominent until medieval Gothic cathedrals. That's centuries after the Roman classical period. Here's a WGUC 100 OA exam tip for you. When a question asks what allowed Romans to build bigger than the Greeks, domes, arches, massive structures, the answer is concrete. Romans equal concrete. Quick recall hook. Romans poured their way to greatness. Concrete equals construction revolution. 25. Around the 6th century BCE, Greek poetry shifted from grand tales celebrating cultural heroes and mythological battles to more intimate works exploring personal emotions like love, desire, and loss from an individual perspective. Which poetic form represents this shift toward personal expression? A. The political treatise in prose. B. The dramatic chorus performance. C. The lyric poem of personal emotion. D. The morality play of the church. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer, C. The lyric poem of personal emotion. Explanation. Option C is correct because Greek lyric poetry emerged around the 6th century BCE, shifting focus from epic heroic themes to everyday life subjects expressed through intimate, personal language and emotions. Option A is incorrect because political treatises are prose works about governance and power, like Machiavelli's The Prince, which belong to the Renaissance period rather than the classical shift in Greek poetry. Option B is incorrect because the dramatic chorus was an element of classical theatre where a group commented on stage action, not a poetic form that represented the shift toward intimate personal expression. Option D is incorrect because morality plays were religious, theatrical performances from the Middle Ages that were designed to teach Christian moral lessons, not a classical Greek poetic form exploring personal emotions. Around the 6th century BCE, something shifted in Greek poetry. Before this, poetry was all about grand tales, epic heroes fighting battles, gods interfering with human affairs, the fate of nations. But then poets started writing about something much more personal: love, desire, loss, the small, intimate moments of being a person. This was the birth of lyric poetry. Option C. Lyric poetry gets its name from the lyre, a stringed instrument that poets accompanied themselves with. The focus moved from the collective to the individual, from national myths to personal emotions. Sappho is the most famous example. Her poems about love and longing are intensely private and emotional. Option A, political treatises, are prose writings about governance. Think Machiavelli's The Prince. That's Renaissance political writing, not 6th century Greek poetry. Option B, the dramatic chorus, was a theatrical element where a group of performers commented on stage action. It's part of Greek drama, not a poetic form about personal feelings. Option D, morality plays, were religious performances from the Middle Ages designed to teach Christian lessons. Wrong era, wrong purpose entirely. Here's a WGUC 100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes a shift from epic or public poetry to personal or emotional poetry, or mentions love, desire, and everyday feelings in verse, the answer is lyric poetry. Quick recall hook. Lyric equals lyre equals personal. If it sounds like something you'd sing alone with a guitar about your feelings, that's lyric poetry. 26. The Renaissance is a French word that literally means rebirth, referring to the revival of values from an earlier historical era that had been diminished during the Middle Ages. Which earlier period's ideals of humanism, rationalism, and balance were being reborn during the Renaissance? A. The classical period of Greece and Rome. B. The Baroque period of elaborate art. C. The Victorian period of novel writing. D. The postmodern period of varied meaning. Do you know the answer? Correct answer, A. The classical period of Greece and Rome. Explanation. Option A is correct because the Renaissance revived the classical period's values of humanism, rationalism and balance that had declined during the Middle Ages when religious devotion dominated European culture. Option B is incorrect because the Baroque period came after the Renaissance and was characterized by elaborate detail and dramatic art created to attract people back to the Catholic faith during the Counter-Reformation. Option C is incorrect because the Victorian period occurred in the 19th century, during the reign of Queen Victoria, which is centuries after the Renaissance, and focused on the rise of novels and broader reading. Option D is incorrect because the postmodern period refers to the second half of the 20th century, a time characterized by rejecting established meanings, which occurred long after the Renaissance had ended. The word Renaissance literally means rebirth in French, so the obvious follow-up question is, rebirth of what? The answer is the classical period of Greece and Rome. Option A. During the Middle Ages, European culture was dominated by religious devotion. The values that drove ancient Greece and Rome, humanism, rationalism, balance, the celebration of individual achievement, had faded into the background. The Renaissance was the moment when European thinkers looked back at those classical ideals and said, we need to bring these back. That's the rebirth. They revived Greek and Roman philosophy, art, architecture, and literature. Option B, the Baroque period, actually came after the Renaissance. It was characterized by elaborate, dramatic art connected to the Counter-Reformation. Option C, the Victorian period, was the 19th century under Queen Victoria. That's hundreds of years too late. Option D, the postmodern period, is the second half of the 20th century. Completely wrong era. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. Renaissance means rebirth, and what was reborn was classical Greek and Roman culture. If a question asks what the Renaissance revived, it's always the classical period. Quick recall hook. Renaissance equals reborn classics. Greek and Roman ideals came back to life. 27. During the Renaissance, nobles and artists began constructing their public identities based on individual interests rather than religious devotion alone. Choices in dress, social behaviour, and cultural pursuits became tools for expressing one's uniqueness. Which Renaissance concept describes this deliberate process of crafting a public persona? A. Polytheism and divine worship. B. Feudalism and land ownership. C. Classical humanism and balance. D. Self-fashioning of individual identity. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer, D. Self-fashioning of individual identity. Explanation. Option D is correct because self-fashioning describes the Renaissance process of constructing one's individual sense of self and public persona according to socially acceptable standards of dress and behaviour. Option A is incorrect because polytheism and divine worship were features of the classical period involving belief in multiple gods, not the Renaissance practice of individuals deliberately crafting their own public identities. Option B is incorrect because feudalism and land ownership defined the medieval social structure where people's roles were determined by birth and land, which is the opposite of choosing one's own public identity. Option C is incorrect because while classical humanism influenced the Renaissance broadly, the specific process of deliberately constructing a public persona through dress and behaviour is termed self-fashioning by scholars. During the Renaissance, something fascinating happened to personal identity. In the Middle Ages, who you were was basically assigned at birth. Your family, your class, your religion defined you. But Renaissance nobles and artists started thinking differently. They began deliberately constructing their public identities based on their own interests. What you wore, how you behaved socially, what cultural pursuits you chose. All of these became tools for expressing your uniqueness. The term for this is self-fashioning. Option D. It's the conscious, deliberate process of crafting who you are and how the world perceives you. Option A, polytheism and divine worship, belongs to the classical period. It's about worshipping multiple gods, not about personal identity construction. Option B, feudalism and land ownership, is the medieval system where your role was fixed by birth and tied to land. That's the exact opposite of choosing your own identity. Option C, classical humanism, is a broader philosophical movement. It influenced the Renaissance, sure, but the specific concept of deliberately crafting a public persona has its own name: self-fashioning. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes people deliberately constructing their public identity through dress, behaviour, and cultural choices during the Renaissance, the answer is self-fashioning. Quick recall hook. Self-fashioning equals selfie culture before cameras. Renaissance people designed how the world saw them. 28. During the Middle Ages, education was narrow and specialised, controlled largely by the church. The Renaissance introduced a dramatically different educational philosophy that encouraged individuals to develop scholarly, artistic, and physical interests broadly. What was one measurable result of this new approach? A. Universities became exclusively religious. B. Education was limited to clergy only. C. European universities more than doubled. D. Schools stopped teaching philosophy entirely. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer, C. European universities more than doubled. Explanation. Option C is correct because the number of European universities more than doubled from 29 in 1400 to 63 by 1601, as society needed more trained professionals, and individuals sought knowledge. Option A is incorrect because the Renaissance actually moved universities towards secular education rather than making them exclusively religious, as some schools no longer needed to be associated with religious faith. Option B is incorrect because limiting education to clergy was characteristic of the Middle Ages, not the Renaissance, which expanded educational access and encouraged broader learning across social classes and professions. Option D is incorrect because philosophy remained a central subject of university study during the Renaissance, and in fact, Renaissance humanists specifically promoted the Studia Humanitatis, which included moral philosophy. The Renaissance didn't just change art and philosophy, it transformed education in a measurable way. During the Middle Ages, education was narrow, specialised, and controlled mostly by the church. The Renaissance flipped that. It introduced a philosophy that said people should develop themselves broadly: scholarly pursuits, artistic interests, physical skills. The result was dramatic growth in European universities. The number more than doubled from 29 in 1400 to 63 by 1601. That's option C. Society needed more trained professionals, and individuals wanted knowledge for its own sake. Option A says universities became exclusively religious, but the Renaissance actually moved them in the opposite direction, toward secular education. Option B says education was limited to clergy, but that describes the Middle Ages, not the Renaissance. The whole point of the Renaissance educational shift was expanding access beyond the clergy. Option D says schools stopped teaching philosophy. Wrong. Philosophy was at the heart of Renaissance education through the Studia Humanitatis. Here's a WGUC 100 OA exam tip for you. When a question asks about a measurable result of Renaissance education, remember the numbers. Universities more than doubled, 29 to 63. That stat is your answer. Quick recall hook. Renaissance education equals doubling down on learning. Universities literally doubled. 29. Leonardo da Vinci was an expert painter, sculptor, architect, musician, mathematician, engineer, inventor, anatomist, and writer who embodied the spirit of the Renaissance through his limitless curiosity. Today, someone with broad knowledge and versatile talent spanning many intellectual disciplines is called what? A Renaissance person of many talents. B. A medieval scholar of narrow focus. C. A Baroque artist of elaborate detail. D. A classical philosopher of pure reason. Do you know the answer? Correct answer. A Renaissance person of many talents. Explanation. Option A is correct, because the term Renaissance man or woman describes an individual with broad knowledge and versatile talents spanning many intellectual and artistic disciplines. Modelled after Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah. Option B is incorrect, because medieval scholars were typically characterised by narrow specialisation in education, which is the direct opposite of the broad, multidisciplinary ideal that the Renaissance person represents in culture. Option C is incorrect, because a Baroque artist is associated with elaborate detail and dramatic emotional expression in art, rather than the broad intellectual versatility across many different disciplines that defines a Renaissance person. Option D is incorrect, because a classical philosopher focused specifically on reason and truth through philosophical inquiry, which is only one dimension of the multi-talented ideal that the Renaissance person concept celebrates. Leonardo da Vinci is the poster child for this concept. The man was a painter, sculptor, architect, musician, mathematician, engineer, inventor, anatomist, and writer. He didn't specialise in one thing, he was brilliant at everything he touched. That's where we get the term Renaissance person, or Renaissance man, or Renaissance woman. Option A. It describes someone with broad knowledge and talent spanning many different fields. The Renaissance celebrated this kind of versatility. Being good at one thing wasn't enough. The ideal was to develop yourself in every direction. Option B, a medieval scholar of narrow focus, is the opposite. Medieval education was specialised and controlled. That's the model the Renaissance pushed against. Option C, a Baroque artist, is associated with elaborate dramatic art. That's a specific artistic style, not broad intellectual versatility. Option D, a classical philosopher focused specifically on philosophical reasoning, which is only one dimension of what a Renaissance person embodies. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes someone with talent spanning many fields, or mentions Leonardo da Vinci as a model, the answer is Renaissance person. Broad versatility across disciplines is the defining feature. Quick recall hook. Renaissance person equals really good at everything. Da Vinci is your mental image. 30. European nations took to the seas during the Renaissance because a powerful empire had blocked their traditional overland trade routes for silks and spices stretching from Constantinople to Beijing. Which empire's expansion forced Europeans to find new maritime routes to the Far East? A. The ancient Roman Empire of Italy. B. The British Empire of Sea Power. C. The Mycenaean Empire of Greece. D. The Ottoman Empire blocking trade. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer. D. The Ottoman Empire blocking trade. Explanation. Option D is correct because the Ottoman Empire's rise cut off the overland Silk Road trade in silks and spices between Europe and the Far East, forcing European nations to seek sea routes. Option A is incorrect because the ancient Roman Empire existed during the classical period and had fallen centuries before the Renaissance age of exploration, so it could not have blocked Renaissance-era trade routes. Option B is incorrect because the British Empire was itself a product of European maritime expansion rather than its cause, and Britain was one of many nations seeking new sea routes during the exploration period. Option C is incorrect because the Mycenaean Empire was an ancient Greek civilization from approximately 1600 to 1100 BCE, which existed thousands of years before the Renaissance age of exploration. The age of exploration didn't happen because Europeans suddenly got curious about sailing. It happened because they had to find another way to trade. The traditional overland route, the Silk Road, ran from Constantinople to Beijing, carrying silks, spices and other valuable goods. But then the Ottoman Empire rose to power and blocked those trade routes. Europeans couldn't get to the Far East by land anymore, so they took to the seas. That's option D, the Ottoman Empire blocking trade. This forced nations like Portugal and Spain to find maritime routes around Africa and across the Atlantic, which changed the entire shape of world history. Option A, the Roman Empire, fell centuries before the Renaissance even started. It couldn't have blocked Renaissance-era trade. Option B, the British Empire, was actually a result of this maritime expansion, not the cause of it. Britain was one of many nations looking for new routes. Option C, the Mycenaean Empire, was an ancient Greek civilization from around 1600 BCE. Thousands of years too early to be relevant here. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question asks why Europeans explored by sea during the Renaissance, the answer is always the Ottoman Empire blocking the Silk Road. Blocked land routes forced sea exploration. Quick recall hook: Ottomans blocked the road, Europeans sailed the sea. Land closed, water opened. 31. A Renaissance political philosopher argued that leaders should use whatever means necessary to maintain power, even if those means violate conventional morality. He dedicated his famous treatise to the ruler of Florence to demonstrate effective governance strategies. Which thinker advanced this controversial principle? A. Plato, the philosopher king advocate. B. Niccolo Machiavelli, the political realist. C. Aristotle, the golden mean developer. D. Socrates, the method of inquiry creator. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer, B. Niccolo Machiavelli, the political realist. Explanation. Option B is correct because Machiavelli wrote The Prince, a political treatise defending that the ends justify the means, and he dedicated it to the ruler of Florence, Lorenzo de' Medici. Option A is incorrect because Plato advocated for a philosopher king who governs through wisdom and justice in the Republic, which is fundamentally different from Machiavelli's amoral approach to political power and control. Option C is incorrect because Aristotle developed the golden mean as a guide to personal virtue through balance between extremes, which is an ethical approach that contrasts sharply with Machiavelli's political pragmatism. Option D is incorrect because Socrates developed the method of philosophical inquiry through persistent questioning, which focuses on discovering truth rather than on strategies for maintaining political power and authority. Machiavelli is one of those names that became its own adjective, Machiavellian, and not in a flattering way. He wrote The Prince, a political treatise dedicated to Lorenzo de' Medici, the ruler of Florence. In it, he argued that leaders should use whatever means necessary to maintain power, even if those means violate conventional morality. The ends justify the means, and that's Machiavelli's core idea. Option B is correct. He wasn't interested in how rulers should ideally behave. He was interested in how rulers actually maintain control in the real world. Option A, Plato, wanted a philosopher king who governs through wisdom and justice. That's the idealistic approach, the polar opposite of Machiavelli's pragmatism. Option C, Aristotle, developed the golden mean for personal virtue through balance, an ethical framework that clashes completely with Machiavelli's willingness to abandon morality for power. Option D, Socrates, created the method of philosophical inquiry through questioning. He was about discovering truth, not about political strategy. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions the ends justify the means, using any means to maintain power, or a treatise dedicated to a ruler of Florence, it's Machiavelli and the Prince, every time. Quick recall hook: Machiavelli equals manipulate to maintain power. The ends justify the means. 32. Baldassare Castiglione wrote a famous Renaissance text, in which elegant attendants at the court of Duke Urbino compete to describe the ideal gentleman over the course of 4 days. The text explores nobility, humour, love, and socially acceptable behaviour. Which Renaissance theme does this work most directly illustrate? A. The Protestant Reformation of faith. B. Scientific rationalism and experimentation. C. Individualism and self-fashioning ideals. D. Polytheistic worship of ancient gods. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer, C. Individualism and self-fashioning ideals. Explanation. Option C is correct because Castiglione's The Courtier directly illustrates self-fashioning by exploring how individuals craft their public personas through socially acceptable standards of behaviour, dress, and cultural knowledge. Option A is incorrect because the Protestant Reformation concerned religious reform and challenging Catholic Church corruption, which is a different Renaissance theme from the social etiquette and personal identity explored in The Courtier. Option B is incorrect because scientific rationalism involves using reason and experimentation to understand the natural world, which is distinct from The Courtier's focus on personal identity, social behaviour, and cultural refinement. Option D is incorrect because polytheistic worship belongs to the classical period of ancient Greece and Rome, not the Renaissance period in which Castiglione wrote about crafting ideal, courtly behaviour and public personas. Castiglione's The Courtier is a window into how Renaissance people thought about personal identity and social performance. The book is set at the court of Duke Urbino, where elegant attendants spend 4 days debating what makes the ideal gentleman. They discuss nobility, humour, love, how to dress, how to behave. Basically, how to present the best version of yourself. This is directly tied to the Renaissance theme of individualism and self-fashioning. Option C. The whole book is about how individuals deliberately craft their public personas. Option A, the Protestant Reformation, is about religious reform and challenging church corruption. It's an important Renaissance event, but it has nothing to do with social etiquette and personal identity. Option B, scientific rationalism, is about using experiments and reason to understand nature. That's a different branch of Renaissance thinking from social self-construction. Option D, polytheistic worship, belongs to ancient Greece and Rome. Completely wrong era and concept. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When you see Castiglione or The Courtier, the theme is individualism and self-fashioning. The book is literally a manual for crafting your ideal public persona. Quick recall hook. The Courtier equals the course in being cool. It's a Renaissance guide to building your best self. 33. Renaissance thinkers like Giovanni Pico della Mirandola believed that because humans were created in the image of God, they possess immense dignity, potential, beauty and worth as individuals. This philosophy blended classical learning with Christian faith. Which term best describes this combined worldview? A. Christian humanism blending faith and reason. B. Medieval feudalism emphasizing social hierarchy. C. Greek polytheism worshipping multiple deities. D. Baroque absolutism supporting divine right. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer, A. Christian humanism blending faith and reason. Explanation. Option A is correct because Christian humanists believe humans were created in God's image and must develop intellectual reason alongside devotion to God, blending classical and Christian perspectives together. Option B is incorrect because medieval feudalism was a social system based on land ownership and fixed class hierarchy that preceded the Renaissance, not a philosophy blending classical learning with Christian theological beliefs. Option C is incorrect because Greek polytheism involved worshipping multiple gods and goddesses during the classical period, which is entirely different from the Renaissance attempt to reconcile classical reason with Christian faith. Option D is incorrect because Baroque absolutism refers to the political concept of divine right of kings during the Baroque period. Not the Renaissance philosophical movement that blended human potential with Christian beliefs. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola represents a specific flavour of Renaissance thinking that tried to have it both ways and succeeded. He believed that because humans were created in God's image, they possess immense dignity, potential, beauty and worth. But instead of stopping at religious devotion, he combined that Christian belief with classical Greek and Roman philosophy. Humans should develop their reason alongside their faith in God. That's Christian humanism. Option A. It's the blending of classical learning with Christian theology. The idea that faith and reason aren't enemies, they work together to produce a fuller understanding of human worth. Option B, medieval feudalism, is a rigid social hierarchy from the Middle Ages. It has nothing to do with blending classical philosophy and Christian belief. Option C, Greek polytheism, is about worshipping multiple gods in the classical period. Wrong era, wrong religion entirely. Option D, Baroque absolutism, refers to the divine right of kings during the Baroque period. That's a political concept from a later era, not a Renaissance philosophical movement. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes blending classical learning with Christian faith, or mentions human dignity because of being created in God's image, the answer is Christian humanism. The keywords are faith plus reason together. Quick recall hook. Christian humanism equals Christ plus classics. Faith and reason holding hands. 34. A Dutch humanist remained loyal to the Catholic Church throughout his life, yet wrote a satirical essay criticising corruption and abuses of Catholic doctrine. He also advocated for a liberal education centred on classical authors that develops both intellect and morality. Which influential reformer fits this description? A. Martin Luther, who split from Rome. B. John Calvin, who formed strict doctrine. C. William Shakespeare, who wrote plays. D. Desiderius Erasmus, who sought reform. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer, D. Desiderius Erasmus, who sought reform. Explanation. Option D is correct because Erasmus remained loyal to Catholicism while writing In Praise of Folly, a satirical critique of church corruption, and advocated for liberal education centred on classical authors. Option A is incorrect because Martin Luther did not remain loyal to the Catholic Church. He was excommunicated and initiated the Protestant Reformation by publicly challenging church practices with his 95 Theses. Option B is incorrect because John Calvin was a Protestant reformer who established strict Reformed Church doctrine in Switzerland, and he separated from the Catholic Church rather than remaining loyal to it while seeking reform. Option C is incorrect because William Shakespeare was a playwright and poet known for works like Hamlet and his sonnets, not a religious reformer who wrote satirical critiques of Catholic Church corruption and doctrine. This question gives you a very specific profile. A Dutch humanist who stayed loyal to the Catholic Church but wrote a satirical essay attacking church corruption. He also pushed for a liberal education rooted in classical authors. That person is Desiderius Erasmus. Option D. Erasmus wrote In Praise of Folly, a brilliant satire that ripped into the corruption and hypocrisy he saw in the church. But here's the thing that makes Erasmus distinct. He never left. He wanted reform from within. He stayed Catholic. He also believed education should be centred on reading classical authors to develop both intellect and morality. Option A, Martin Luther, is the big contrast here. Luther didn't stay loyal. He was excommunicated and split from the church entirely, launching the Protestant Reformation. Option B, John Calvin, also left Catholicism and established his own strict Reformed doctrine in Switzerland. Option C, William Shakespeare, was a playwright and poet. He wrote Hamlet and sonnets, not satirical religious critiques. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. The key distinction on the exam is loyal to Catholicism plus criticism. If the reformer stayed Catholic, it's Erasmus. If they left or were excommunicated, it's Luther or Calvin. Quick recall hook. Erasmus equals edit from the inside. He wanted to fix the church, not leave it. 35. Renaissance literature departed from medieval traditions by emphasizing the psychological complexity of individuals rather than focusing solely on societal moral structures. Writers explored human emotions like loyalty, ambition, love and greed. Which writer became the most famous in English literature during this period? A. Homer, the ancient Greek epic poet. B. William Shakespeare, the playwright. C. Sappho, the Greek lyric poet. D. Aristophanes, the comedy writer. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer, B. William Shakespeare, the playwright. Explanation. Option B is correct because William Shakespeare became the most famous writer in English by writing plays and poems that examine complex human emotions like loyalty, ambition, love, hate, greed, and self-sacrifice. Option A is incorrect because Homer was an ancient Greek epic poet from the classical period who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, not a Renaissance-era writer when psychological complexity became the literary focus. Option C is incorrect because Sappho was a classical Greek lyric poet who wrote intimate poems about love and desire, living centuries before the Renaissance period when Shakespeare and other English writers flourished. Option D is incorrect because Aristophanes was a classical Greek comedy playwright who wrote works like Lysistrata, living during ancient times rather than during the Renaissance period of literary experimentation and innovation. When the question asks who became the most famous writer in English literature during the Renaissance, there's really only one answer. William Shakespeare, option B. Shakespeare wrote plays and poems that dig into the full range of human psychology. Loyalty, ambition, love, hate, greed, self-sacrifice. He explored emotions with a depth and complexity that nobody in English had achieved before. What made Renaissance literature different from medieval writing was this shift from societal moral structures to individual psychological complexity. Medieval literature was about collective lessons. What's good for society? What's sinful? What's righteous? Shakespeare and other Renaissance writers asked, what's actually going on inside this person's head? Option A, Homer, was an ancient Greek epic poet who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Great works, but they're from the classical period, not the Renaissance. Option C, Sappho, was a Greek lyric poet. Also classical, centuries too early. Option D, Aristophanes, wrote Greek comedies like Lysistrata. Again, ancient Greece, not the Renaissance. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question pairs Renaissance literature with English and asks about the most famous writer, it's Shakespeare. He's the default answer for Renaissance English literature. Quick recall hook. Shakespeare equals psychology on stage. He turned inner emotions into public drama. 36. Renaissance painters wanted their works to look like windows onto the real world rather than flat two-dimensional surfaces. By applying mathematical principles, they mastered a technique that creates the illusion of distance on a flat surface through the use of converging lines and vanishing points. What is this technique called? A. Contrapposto sculptural stance. B. Fresco wall painting method. C. Linear perspective using vanishing points. D. Word painting and vocal music. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer, C. Linear perspective using vanishing points. Explanation. Option C is correct because linear perspective is the Renaissance technique that creates the illusion of depth on a flat surface through the use of converging lines and one or more vanishing points. Option A is incorrect because contrapposto is a classical Greek sculptural technique, creating a lifelike stance by placing weight on one foot. Not a painting technique for creating the illusion of depth on flat surfaces. Option B is incorrect because fresco is a painting method where artists paint on still wet plaster placed on walls, which describes the medium used rather than the mathematical technique for creating depth illusion. Option D is incorrect because word painting is a Renaissance musical technique used in madrigals where notes ascend or descend to match the literal meaning of lyrics, not a visual art technique for creating depth. Renaissance painters had a specific goal. They wanted their paintings to look like windows onto the real world, not flat decorated surfaces. To achieve this, they figured out a mathematical technique that creates the illusion of depth and distance on a flat canvas. Lines in the painting converge toward one or more vanishing points, tricking the eye into seeing three-dimensional space where there is none. This technique is linear perspective, option C. It was a game changer for visual art. Suddenly paintings had realistic depth and the viewer felt like they could step right into the scene. Option A, contrapposto, is a sculptural stance. Weight on one foot, hips and shoulders, creating dynamic balance. That's sculpture, not painting. Option B, fresco, is a painting method where you apply paint to wet plaster on walls. It tells you what surface you're painting on, not how you create the illusion of depth. Option D, word painting, is a musical technique from Renaissance madrigals where the notes go up when the lyrics talk about ascending. It has nothing to do with visual art at all. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions converging lines, vanishing points, the illusion of depth on a flat surface, or paintings looking like windows, the answer is linear perspective. Quick recall hook. Linear perspective equals lines converging. L for L. Lines lead to the vanishing point, creating depth. 37. In addition to linear perspective, Renaissance artists developed another important technique for creating the illusion of three-dimensional depth in their paintings. This method uses carefully controlled gradations of light and shade to give figures and objects a rounded, realistic appearance. Which artistic technique does this describe? A. Blank verse in theatrical dialogue. B. Polyphonic singing in madrigal form. C. Symmetrical design in architecture. D. Chiaroscuro using light and shade. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer. D. Chiaroscuro using light and shade. Explanation. Option D is correct because chiaroscuro is the Renaissance painting technique that creates the illusion of three-dimensional depth through careful gradations of light and shade applied to figures and objects. Option A is incorrect because blank verse is a literary technique used in Renaissance theatre, consisting of metered poetry written in iambic pentameter without rhyme, not a visual art technique for depicting depth. Option B is incorrect because polyphonic singing is a musical technique using multiple independent vocal lines simultaneously, which was characteristic of Renaissance madrigals rather than painting techniques for creating depth. Option C is incorrect because symmetrical design is an architectural principle involving balanced, proportional arrangement of building elements, not a painting technique that uses gradations of light and shade for depth. If linear perspective handles depth through geometry and math, chiaroscuro handles it through light. Renaissance painters discovered that by carefully controlling gradations of light and shadow on a figure or object, they could make it look rounded and three-dimensional, like it was popping off the canvas. That's chiaroscuro, option D. The word comes from Italian, combining chiaro meaning light and scuro meaning dark. This technique gave paintings a dramatic, sculptural quality that flat colouring couldn't achieve. Option A, blank verse, is a literary technique, metered poetry in iambic pentameter without rhyme, used in Renaissance theatre. That's words on a page, not paint on a canvas. Option B, polyphonic singing, is a musical technique using multiple independent vocal lines at once. That's what you hear in Renaissance madrigals, not something you see in a painting. Option C, symmetrical design, is an architectural principle about balanced proportions in buildings. Related to visual arts broadly, but not the specific technique of using light and shade for depth. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions light and shade, gradations of brightness and darkness, or making flat figures look three-dimensional and rounded, the answer is chiaroscuro. Quick recall hook: chiaroscuro equals clear and obscure, light and dark working together to create depth. 38. Michelangelo sculpted a famous marble figure depicting a biblical hero before his battle rather than after his victory, creating dramatic tension and uncertainty. Earlier sculptors like Donatello showed the same hero relaxed with his enemy, defeated at his feet. What makes Michelangelo's approach innovative? A. Depicting the hero before the battle. B. Showing the hero after his victory. C. Removing all classical influences entirely. D. Using bronze instead of marble material. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer: A. Depicting the hero before the battle. Explanation: Option A is correct, because Michelangelo's innovation was depicting David before his battle with Goliath, creating dramatic tension and uncertainty, unlike earlier works that showed David relaxed after his victory. Option B is incorrect, because showing the hero after victory was exactly what earlier sculptors like Donatello and Verrocchio had already done, placing Goliath's head at David's feet in their more traditional compositions. Option C is incorrect, because Michelangelo did not remove classical influences. His David is in clear contrapposto stance, directly inspired by classical Greek sculpture, particularly the proportions seen in works like the Doryphoros. Option D is incorrect, because Michelangelo's David was carved from marble, not bronze, and using marble for this monumental nude figure was itself notable as the first large-scale classical nude sculpture made in Florence. Michelangelo's David is probably the most famous sculpture in the world, and the question is testing whether you understand what made his approach different from everyone before him. Earlier sculptors like Donatello and Verrocchio showed David after his victory, standing over Goliath's severed head, relaxed, the battle already won. Michelangelo did something nobody expected. He showed David before the fight, muscles tensed, eyes locked on his enemy, the outcome still uncertain. That decision created dramatic tension. You look at that statue and you don't know if he's going to win. That uncertainty is what makes it so powerful. The answer is option A, depicting the hero before the battle. Option B, showing the hero after victory, is what the earlier sculptors already did. That's the old approach, not the innovation. Option C says Michelangelo removed all classical influences, but that's wrong. His David stands in contrapposto, a Greek sculptural stance. He was directly inspired by classical art. Option D says he used bronze instead of marble, but Michelangelo's David is famously carved from marble. It was the first large-scale classical nude sculpture made in Florence. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions Michelangelo's David and asks about his innovation, the answer is showing the hero before the battle. Before equals tension, after equals relaxation. Michelangelo chose tension. Quick recall hook: Michelangelo's David equals before the battle. The moment before the fight is more dramatic than the moment after. 39. Renaissance architecture departed from the irregular profiles of medieval structures by embracing geometric arrangements, symmetry, and classical elements borrowed from ancient Greece and Rome. One ancient Roman structural innovation was revived during the Renaissance and became an important architectural contribution. Which element was this? A. Gothic pointed arches and flying buttresses. B. Medieval stained glass window panels. C. The dome first introduced in ancient Rome. D. Egyptian pyramid construction techniques. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer: C. The dome first introduced in ancient Rome. Explanation. Option C is correct, because the revival of the dome, first introduced in ancient Rome with structures like the Pantheon, was an important Renaissance architectural contribution exemplified by Brunelleschi's Florence Cathedral. Option A is incorrect because Gothic pointed arches and flying buttresses were characteristic of medieval Gothic architecture, not Renaissance architecture, which deliberately moved away from medieval building styles toward classical forms. Option B is incorrect because medieval stained glass window panels were a feature of Gothic cathedrals during the Middle Ages, not a Renaissance architectural innovation inspired by the revival of ancient Greek and Roman elements. Option D is incorrect because Egyptian pyramid construction techniques belong to ancient Egyptian civilization and were not revived during the Renaissance, which focused on classical Greek and Roman architectural elements like domes and columns. Renaissance architecture had a very specific agenda: move away from the irregular, vertical, God-reaching profiles of medieval Gothic buildings and get back to the geometric order, symmetry, and classical elements of ancient Greece and Rome. And the biggest structural element they revived from ancient Rome was the dome. Option C. The Romans had built the original Pantheon with its massive dome, and that technology was essentially lost during the Middle Ages. Brunelleschi brought it back when he engineered the dome for the Florence Cathedral. It was a stunning technical achievement and a direct connection back to Roman engineering. Option A, Gothic pointed arches and flying buttresses, are the exact things the Renaissance was moving away from. Those are medieval, not classical. Option B, stained glass windows, are also Gothic medieval. They belong in cathedrals like Chartres, not in Renaissance buildings. Option D, Egyptian pyramid construction, is from ancient Egypt, thousands of years before the Renaissance, and not the classical tradition they were reviving. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question asks about a Roman architectural element revived during the Renaissance, the answer is the dome. Romans invented it with the Pantheon. Brunelleschi brought it back in Florence. Quick recall hook. Dome equals Roman revival. Pantheon to Florence. The dome came back. 40. Renaissance painters increasingly preferred a new medium over older options like fresco and tempera because it dried more slowly and produced colours with a jewel-like depth and rich appearance. Flemish Northern Renaissance painters contributed greatly to this change. Which painting medium became widespread? A. Watercolour on paper surfaces. B. Oil paints as a preferred medium. C. Charcoal sketching on canvas. D. Mosaic tiles on wall surfaces. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer: B. Oil paints as a preferred medium. Explanation. Option B is correct because oil paints became much more common during the Renaissance, favoured by many painters over fresco or tempera because oils dried slowly and produced jewel-like depth and appearance. Option A is incorrect because while watercolour was used for specific works, it did not become the widespread preferred medium that transformed Renaissance painting techniques and visual qualities across Europe. Option C is incorrect because charcoal sketching was used for preparatory drawings and studies rather than as the primary painting medium that Renaissance artists chose for their finished works due to its visual qualities. Option D is incorrect because mosaic tiles were a decorative art form used primarily in ancient Roman and Byzantine art, not the painting medium that Flemish Northern Renaissance painters helped popularise across European studios. Renaissance painters eventually found a medium that gave them something fresco and tempera couldn't: slow drying time and rich, jewel-like colours. That medium was oil paint. Option B. Oil paints dry slowly, which means artists could take their time, blend colours more carefully, build up layers, and make corrections. The result was paintings with a depth and luminosity that looked almost like they were glowing from within. Flemish painters in the Northern Renaissance were especially important in popularising this shift to oils? Option A, watercolour, was used for specific works. Dürer's Young Hair is a famous example, but it never became the dominant medium that transformed Renaissance painting across Europe. Option C, charcoal, was used for preparatory, sketches and studies, not as the primary medium for finished works. Artists sketched in charcoal first, then painted over it. Option D, mosaic tiles, were a decorative art form from ancient Roman and Byzantine traditions. They had nothing to do with the Renaissance painting revolution. Here's a WGUC 100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions slow drying, jewel-like colours, rich depth, or Flemish Northern Renaissance painters, the answer is oil paints. Oils replace fresco and tempera as the preferred medium. Quick recall hook. Oil equals rich and slow. Slow drying gave painters control. Rich colours gave paintings life. 41. In 1517, a German monk wrote a document challenging the Catholic Church's practice of selling forgiveness for sins through financial payments. This document was translated from Latin into German and spread across Europe, eventually sparking a massive religious movement. Who authored this historic protest and what was it called? A. Erasmus writing in praise of folly. B. Castiglione writing the Courtier. C. Machiavelli writing the Prince. D. Martin Luther writing the 95 Theses. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer. D. Martin Luther writing the 95 Theses. Explanation. Option D is correct, because Martin Luther wrote the 95 Theses in 1517, challenging the Catholic Church's sale of indulgences, which became the cornerstone of the Protestant Reformation movement. Option A is incorrect, because Erasmus wrote in praise of folly as a satirical critique of church corruption, while remaining loyal to Catholicism, which is fundamentally different from Luther's direct challenge that split Christianity. Option B is incorrect because Castiglione wrote the Courtier about ideal social behaviour and etiquette at the court of Duke Urbino, which addresses social customs rather than religious reform or church corruption practices. Option C is incorrect because Machiavelli wrote The Prince as a political treatise about governance and maintaining power, which deals with secular political strategy rather than religious reform of Catholic Church practices. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther did something that split Christianity in half. He wrote a document called the 95 Theses, Option D, challenging the Catholic Church's practice of selling indulgences. Indulgences were basically financial payments you made to the Church in exchange for forgiveness of your sins. Luther looked at this system and said, "This is corrupt. This isn't what Christianity is supposed to be." He wrote his objections in Latin, but they were quickly translated into German and spread across Europe thanks to the printing press. That document became the spark that ignited the Protestant Reformation, one of the biggest religious upheavals in Western history. Option A, Erasmus writing in praise of folly, is a common trap on this question. Erasmus did criticise the Church, but he did it through satire, and he stayed loyal to Catholicism. He never tried to split the Church. Option B, Castiglione writing the Courtier, is about social etiquette and the ideal gentleman. It has zero connection to religious reform. Option C, Machiavelli writing The Prince, is a political treatise about power, secular strategy, not religious protest. Here's a WGUC 100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions 1517, challenging the sale of indulgences, or sparking the Protestant Reformation, the answer is Martin Luther and the 95 Theses. The date and the document are inseparable. Quick recall hook. Luther equals the list. 95 complaints nailed to the door that changed everything. 42. During the Elizabethan era, women were forbidden from performing on stage because the acting profession was considered unseemly and sinful for females. The famous female characters in Shakespeare's plays, including Juliet and Lady Macbeth, were therefore performed by a specific group of performers. Who played these female roles? A. Young male actors with high voices. B. Foreign women imported from France. C. Masked aristocratic noblewomen only. D. Trained female singers from churches. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer: A. Young male actors with high voices. Explanation: Option A is correct, because all Elizabethan stage actors were male, and female characters like Juliet and Lady Macbeth were played by young boys aged 13 to 19 who still had high-pitched voices. Option B is incorrect because no women were permitted on the Elizabethan public stage regardless of nationality, so importing foreign women would not have circumvented the cultural prohibition against female stage actors. Option C is incorrect because while aristocratic women did participate in court masks wearing literal masks on their faces, they did not perform in the public theatres where Shakespeare's plays were staged for general audiences. Option D is incorrect because church singers were not used for theatrical roles on the Elizabethan stage, and the prohibition against women performing applied broadly to all females, regardless of their musical training or background. Here's a fact about Elizabethan theatre that catches people off guard. Women were completely banned from performing on stage. The acting profession was considered unseemly and sinful for females. So every female character you've ever heard of in Shakespeare, Juliet, Lady Macbeth, Ophelia, Desdemona, all of them were played by young male actors with high-pitched voices. That's option A. These were boys typically aged 13 to 19, whose voices hadn't fully deepened yet, making them convincing enough to play women's roles. The entire audience knew this was happening, and it was simply the accepted convention of the time. Option B suggests foreign women imported from France, but the ban applied to all women regardless of nationality. Being French didn't give you a stage pass. Option C mentions masked aristocratic noblewomen. And there's a grain of truth here. Noblewomen did participate in private court masks where they wore masks, but that was an entirely different performance context from the public theatres where Shakespeare's plays ran. Option D, trained female singers from churches, doesn't work either. The prohibition against women performing was broad and covered all females regardless of their background or training. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question asks who played female roles in Elizabethan theatre, the answer is young boys or young male actors. No women on the public stage, period. Quick recall hook: Elizabethan females equals actually males. Boys played the girls, no exceptions on the public stage. 43. Christopher Marlowe wrote a tragedy about a scholar dissatisfied with academic limits who sells his soul to the devil for supernatural power. Despite chances to repent, the scholar squanders his abilities on cheap tricks before being dragged to eternal punishment. Which Renaissance theme does this explore? A. Self-fashioning through social etiquette. B. Democratic reform of government systems. C. The dangerous quest for forbidden knowledge. D. Neoclassical balance in architecture design. Do you know the answer? Correct answer: C. The dangerous quest for forbidden knowledge. Explanation: Option C is correct because Dr. Faustus mirrors the Renaissance hunger for knowledge, while warning about the restlessness and dangers that come from pursuing knowledge beyond human boundaries and divine limits. Option A is incorrect because self-fashioning concerns constructing a public persona through dress and social behaviour, which is a different Renaissance theme from the spiritual and intellectual dangers explored in Dr. Faustus's story. Option B is incorrect because democratic reform of government systems relates to political themes from the classical and Enlightenment periods, not the theological struggle between salvation and damnation explored in Marlowe's tragedy. Option D is incorrect, because neoclassical balance in architecture is an artistic movement from the later Enlightenment period, not the Renaissance-era theological and philosophical themes about the limits of human knowledge and ambition. Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus is a play that captures one of the Renaissance's deepest anxieties. What happens when the hunger for knowledge goes too far? Faustus is a scholar who's mastered every academic subject but still isn't satisfied, so he makes a deal with the devil, his soul in exchange for supernatural power and knowledge beyond human limits. And what does he do with that power? Cheap tricks, pranks on the Pope, summoning grapes out of season. He wastes it entirely and ends up dragged to hell. The theme here is the dangerous quest for forbidden knowledge. Option C. The Renaissance celebrated learning and curiosity, but Dr. Faustus is the cautionary tale. There are limits and crossing them has consequences. Option A, self-fashioning through social etiquette, is about constructing a public persona. That's Castiglione's courtier territory, not a story about selling your soul. Option B, democratic reform, is a political concept from the classical and Enlightenment periods. It has nothing to do with the spiritual struggle between salvation and damnation. Option D, neoclassical balance in architecture, is an artistic movement from a later period. Wrong era, wrong category entirely. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes Dr. Faustus or mentions selling a soul for forbidden knowledge, the theme is the dangerous quest for knowledge beyond human limits. Renaissance curiosity had a dark side, and Faustus is the warning. Quick recall hook. Faustus equals fatal curiosity. He wanted to know too much, and it cost him everything. 45. Renaissance playwrights developed techniques to reveal characters' inner thoughts to the audience. In one device, a character speaks aloud while alone on stage, sharing private reflections no other character can hear. Shakespeare used this masterfully in Hamlet's famous speech. What is this dramatic technique called? A. The soliloquy revealing inner thoughts. B. The chorus commenting between scenes. C. The double entendre with two meanings. D. The allegory making ideas physical. Do you know the answer? Correct answer, A. The soliloquy, revealing inner thoughts. Explanation. Option A is correct, because a soliloquy is a dramatic technique where a character speaks aloud to themselves on stage, revealing innermost thoughts to the audience, while no other character hears the speech. Option B is incorrect because the chorus was a group of 12 to 15 men in classical Greek theatre who commented between scenes and gave characters warnings, not a Renaissance technique for revealing private thoughts. Option C is incorrect because double entendre is a literary device where words or phrases carry two meanings simultaneously, commonly used in classical Greek comedy, like Lysistrata, rather than for revealing a character's private thoughts. Option D is incorrect because allegory represents abstract concepts in physical form, as seen in Dr. Faustus with the 7 deadly sins, not a method for revealing a character's inner psychological state on stage. Hamlet's famous soliloquy, "To be or not to be," is one of the most analysed speeches in all of literature, and the exam uses it to test a specific concept. In the classical period, Greek heroes didn't fear death the way Hamlet does. The Greeks had a known afterlife. Hades, the Elysian fields, the underworld. There was a destination. You might not like it, but at least you knew what was coming. Hamlet doesn't have that certainty. For him, death is the undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveller returns. He's paralysed by the unknown. This fear of the unknown afterlife, option B, represents a Renaissance departure from classical thinking. Renaissance characters wrestled with doubt and uncertainty in ways that classical heroes simply didn't. Option A, celebrating polytheistic gods, is a classical period activity. It has nothing to do with Hamlet's existential crisis. Option C, trusting fate determined by gods, is also classical thinking. Greek heroes accepted their predetermined destinies. Hamlet can't even decide what to do, let alone accept fate. Option D, embracing suicide as noble duty, misreads the soliloquy entirely. Hamlet doesn't embrace death. He agonizes over it because he fears what comes after. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question contrasts Hamlet with classical heroes regarding death, the answer is fear of the unknown afterlife. Greeks knew where they were going. Hamlet didn't. That uncertainty is the Renaissance difference. Quick recall hook. Hamlet equals hesitation about the afterlife. Classical heroes accepted death. Hamlet feared the unknown. 45. Renaissance playwrights developed techniques to reveal characters' inner thoughts to the audience. In one device, a character speaks aloud while alone on stage, sharing private reflections no other character can hear. Shakespeare used this masterfully in Hamlet's famous speech. What is this dramatic technique called? A. The soliloquy revealing inner thoughts. B. The chorus commenting between scenes. C. The double entendre with two meanings. D. The allegory making ideas physical. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer, A. The soliloquy, revealing inner thoughts. Explanation. Option A is correct because a soliloquy is a dramatic technique where a character speaks aloud to themselves on stage, revealing innermost thoughts to the audience, while no other character hears the speech. Option B is incorrect because the chorus was a group of 12 to 15 men in classical Greek theatre who commented between scenes and gave characters warnings, not a Renaissance technique for revealing private thoughts. Option C is incorrect because double entendre is a literary device where words or phrases carry two meanings simultaneously, commonly used in classical Greek comedy, like Lysistrata, rather than for revealing a character's private thoughts. Option D is incorrect because allegory represents abstract concepts in physical form, as seen in Dr. Faustus with the 7 deadly sins, not a method for revealing a character's inner psychological state on stage. Renaissance playwrights needed a way to let the audience inside a character's head, to hear what someone is really thinking when nobody else is around. The technique they perfected for this is the soliloquy. Option A. A soliloquy is when a character speaks aloud while alone on stage, sharing their most private thoughts directly with the audience. No other character in the play can hear what's being said. Shakespeare used this brilliantly. Hamlet's to be or not to be speech is the most famous example. It's the Renaissance equivalent of a character breaking the fourth wall to tell you what they're really feeling. Option B, the chorus, was a group of 12 to 15 men in Greek theatre who commented on the action between scenes and gave warnings to characters. That's a classical technique, and it's a group narrating, not a single character revealing private thoughts. Option C, double entendre, is a literary device where a word or phrase carries two meanings at once. You see it a lot in Greek comedy, like Lysistrata. It's about wordplay, not inner psychology. Option D, allegory, is when abstract ideas are represented as physical characters or objects, like the 7 deadly sins appearing as actual characters in Dr. Faustus. That's symbolic representation, not a window into someone's mind. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes a character speaking alone on stage, revealing private thoughts the audience hears, but other characters don't, the answer is soliloquy. One person alone thinking out loud. Quick recall hook. Soliloquy equals solo speaking. Solo on stage, speaking your innermost thoughts. 46. 3 inventions are identified in the course as fundamentally changing how people live: the printing press, electricity, and the internet. The printing press arrived in Europe in 1450 and transformed literacy by making manuscripts affordable for the rising middle class. Who invented it? A. Thomas Edison, the light bulb inventor. B. Leonardo da Vinci, the Renaissance artist. C. Benjamin Franklin, the Enlightenment thinker. D. Johannes Gutenberg, the German printer. Do you know the answer? Correct answer, D. Johannes Gutenberg, the German printer. Explanation. Option D is correct because Johannes Gutenberg invented the movable type printing press in Germany in 1450, revolutionizing the dissemination of information and dramatically changing literacy rates across all of Europe. Option A is incorrect because Thomas Edison is associated with the invention of the light bulb and contributions to electricity, which is identified as the second of the three world-changing inventions, not the printing press. Option B is incorrect because Leonardo da Vinci was a Renaissance artist, inventor and scientist known for the Mona Lisa, but he did not invent the printing press that transformed European communication and literacy. Option C is incorrect because Benjamin Franklin was an Enlightenment-era American thinker associated with electricity experiments, and the lightning rod, not the invention of the European printing press in medieval Germany. The course identifies three inventions that fundamentally changed how people live: the printing press, electricity, and the internet. This question focuses on the first one. The printing press arrived in Europe in 1450, and it was invented by Johannes Gutenberg. Option D. Gutenberg created the movable type printing press in Germany, and it changed everything about how information spread. Before Gutenberg, books were hand-copied, slow, expensive, and limited to the wealthy and the clergy. After Gutenberg, manuscripts became affordable. The rising middle class could actually buy books. Literacy rates across Europe started climbing. It was a communication revolution. Option A, Thomas Edison, is associated with the light bulb and electricity. That's the second of the three world-changing inventions, not the first. Option B, Leonardo da Vinci, was a brilliant Renaissance inventor and artist, but the printing press wasn't one of his creations. Option C, Benjamin Franklin, is linked to electricity experiments and the lightning rod. That's Enlightenment-era science, not medieval German printing. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. The three inventions to remember are printing press, electricity, internet. In that order. For the printing press, the name is Gutenberg. The year is 1450. The country is Germany. Quick recall hook. Gutenberg equals the guy who gave us books. G for Gutenberg. G for gave us literacy. 47. An ancient trade route connected the Mediterranean region to all of Asia, stretching from Constantinople to Beijing. This route carried not only valuable Chinese silk and Roman glass, but also spread religions like Buddhism, Manichaeism, and Taoism between civilizations. What was this famous route called? A. The Age of Exploration Sea Lanes. B. The Middle Passage across the ocean. C. The Silk Road connecting East and West. D. The Mediterranean Sea Trading Network. Can you guess the answer? Correct answer, C. The Silk Road connecting East and West. Explanation. Option C is correct because the Silk Road was the overland trade route from Constantinople to Beijing that facilitated exchange of goods like silk and glass and spread religions between Eastern and Western civilizations. Option A is incorrect because the Age of Exploration involved sea routes developed during the Renaissance after the Silk Road was blocked, representing a later method of global trade rather than the original overland connection. Option B is incorrect because the Middle Passage refers to the brutal transatlantic journey during which enslaved African people were transported to the Americas, not an ancient trade route connecting Eastern and Western civilizations. Option D is incorrect because while the Mediterranean Sea facilitated cultural exchange among nearby civilizations in southern Europe and North Africa, it was not the specific overland route stretching all the way to Beijing. The Silk Road is one of those terms that sounds like it should be simple, but there's a lot packed into it. It was the overland trade route stretching from Constantinople in the west all the way to Beijing in the east. And it didn't just carry goods: silk from China, glass from Rome, spices, precious metals. It also spread religions: Buddhism, Manichaeism, Taoism, and later Islam all travelled along this route between civilizations. That's option C, the Silk Road connecting east and west. It was the original information superhighway, just with camels instead of cables. Option A, the Age of Exploration sea lanes, came later. Those maritime routes were developed during the Renaissance specifically because the Silk Road got blocked by the Ottoman Empire. The sea lanes were the replacement, not the original. Option B, the Middle Passage, refers to something completely different and far more tragic: the transatlantic route where enslaved African people were forcibly transported to the Americas. It's not a trade route between East and West. Option D, the Mediterranean Trading Network, describes trade around the Mediterranean Sea, which connected southern Europe and North Africa, but didn't stretch anywhere close to Beijing. Here's a WGUC 100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions Constantinople to Beijing, exchange of silk and glass, or the spread of religions between East and West, the answer is the Silk Road. Quick recall hook. Silk Road equals silk stretching from west to east. Constantinople to Beijing, goods and gods travelling together. 48. Renaissance musicians developed a popular secular vocal form using 3 to 6 unaccompanied voices that originated in Florence, Italy. Composers used a technique called word painting, where ascending notes accompanied lyrics about going up and slow minor music accompanied lyrics about death. What is this vocal form called? A, the Delphic hymn from ancient Greece. B, the madrigal of the Renaissance. C, the Gregorian chant of medieval monks. D, the opera of the Baroque era. Do you know the answer? Correct answer, B, the madrigal of the Renaissance. Explanation. Option B is correct, because the madrigal was a popular secular Renaissance vocal form, using 3 to 6 unaccompanied voices that employed word painting to musically illustrate the literal meaning of lyrics. Option A is incorrect, because the Delphic hymn is an ancient Greek musical composition honouring Apollo at the Pythian Games, not a Renaissance secular vocal form using word painting with multiple unaccompanied voices. Option C is incorrect, because Gregorian chant was a medieval sacred musical form sung by monks in monasteries and churches, which is religious in nature and fundamentally different from the secular, polyphonic Renaissance madrigal. Option D is incorrect, because opera emerged later, displacing the madrigal in popularity, and typically features instrumental accompaniment and dramatic staging. Unlike the unaccompanied secular vocal format of the Renaissance madrigal. Renaissance music had its own innovations, just like painting and sculpture did, and the madrigal is the one you need to know. The madrigal was a secular vocal form, not religious, that used 3 to 6 unaccompanied voices. No instruments backing them up, just voices. It originated in Florence, Italy, and composers used a technique called word painting, where the music literally illustrated the lyrics. If the words described something going up, the notes would ascend. If the lyrics were about death, the music would slow down into minor keys. That's option B, the madrigal. Option A, the Delphic hymn, is an ancient Greek composition honouring Apollo at the Pythian Games. It's from the classical period, not the Renaissance, and it's a religious hymn, not a secular vocal form. Option C, Gregorian chant, was sacred music sung by medieval monks in monasteries. It's religious, it's medieval, and it uses a single melodic line rather than multiple independent voices. The madrigal is secular and polyphonic, the exact opposite in almost every way. Option D, opera, actually replaced the madrigal in popularity. Opera came later and features instrumental accompaniment and dramatic staging. That's fundamentally different from the unaccompanied vocal style of the madrigal. Here's a WGUC 100 OA exam tip for you. When a question mentions secular voices without instruments, word painting, 3 to 6 voices or Florence, The answer is the madrigal. Quick recall hook. Madrigal equals music that paints words. The notes literally draw pictures of what the lyrics describe. 49. The course explains that historical periods often emerge as reactions to the ones that came before them. For example, the Romantic era reacted against the Enlightenment's focus on reason by recovering emotion, beauty, and excitement in art and literature. Which description best characterizes the Romantic period's reaction? A. Embracing strict rational thinking only. B. Returning to medieval feudal systems. C. Rejecting all artistic expression entirely. D. Countering Enlightenment, emphasis on. Do you know the answer? Reason. Correct answer. D. Countering Enlightenment, emphasis on reason. Explanation. Option D is correct because the Romantic era was essentially a counter-Enlightenment movement, where poets and writers found the Enlightenment period devoid of emotion, dull, uninspiring, and lacking in beauty. Option A is incorrect because embracing strict rational thinking was characteristic of the Enlightenment itself, and the Romantic period specifically rejected this purely rational approach in favour of emotion, passion, and natural beauty. Option B is incorrect because returning to medieval feudal systems would mean restoring the hierarchy of lords and serfs, which was not the Romantic goal, even though Romantic writers found inspiration in medieval stories. Option C is incorrect because the Romantic period did not reject artistic expression at all. Instead, it celebrated and expanded artistic expression by emphasizing emotion, individualism, nature, heroism, and passionate creative beauty. Historical periods don't happen in a vacuum. They often emerge as direct reactions against whatever came before. The Romantic era is a perfect example. The Enlightenment was all about reason, logic, rational thinking, scientific method. And the Romantics looked at all of that and said, where's the feeling? Where's the beauty? Where's the passion? They found the Enlightenment cold, dull, and uninspiring. So they swung in the opposite direction, recovering emotion, beauty, excitement, and a deep connection to nature in their art and literature. That's option D, countering the Enlightenment emphasis on reason. Option A says the Romantics embraced strict rational thinking, but that's literally describing the Enlightenment itself, the exact thing the Romantics were rebelling against. Option B suggests returning to medieval feudal systems. While Romantic writers did find inspiration in medieval stories and settings, they weren't trying to bring back the social hierarchy of lords and serfs. They borrowed the aesthetic, not the politics. Option C says the Romantics rejected all artistic expression, which is absurd. They were the most artistically expressive movement of their time. They didn't reject art, they supercharged it with emotion, individualism, and natural beauty. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes a reaction against Enlightenment rationalism, or a movement that brought back emotion and beauty to art, the answer is the Romantic era. Reason triggered the opposite, feeling. Quick recall hook. Romantic equals reaction against reason. The Enlightenment was too cold, so the Romantics brought the heat. 50. African slaves brought traditional tribal music to the United States and combined it with religious church music, creating new musical forms. Later, American rap music with its underlying African rhythms became popular in Africa, returning to its cultural roots. Which concept does this circular exchange illustrate? A. Cultural exchange across global communities. B. Isolation of cultures from one another. C. Elimination of all traditional music forms. D. Scientific discovery through experimentation. What do you think is the answer? Correct answer. A. Cultural exchange across global communities. Explanation. Option A is correct because this circular journey of African music to America and American rap back to Africa perfectly illustrates the ongoing cultural exchange between global communities. Option B is incorrect because the story of African music travelling to America and returning as rap demonstrates the opposite of cultural isolation, showing instead how deeply interconnected global musical traditions have always been. Option C is incorrect because traditional music forms were not eliminated, but rather transformed and combined with other traditions, creating new genres like gospel music, while the original African rhythms continue to influence art. Option D is incorrect because this example illustrates cultural and artistic exchange between civilizations rather than scientific discovery through experimentation. This last question wraps up the entire course with one of its biggest themes: cultural exchange across global communities. The scenario describes a circular journey. African slaves brought their traditional tribal music to America. That music combined with religious church music to create new forms like gospel and eventually blues, jazz, and more. Then American rap music, which carries those underlying African rhythms, became popular back in Africa. The music went from Africa to America and then returned home in a completely new form. That's cultural exchange. Option A. It's a perfect example of how art and culture flow between civilizations, transforming along the way, but never losing their roots entirely. Option B says cultures were isolated from each other, but this story proves the exact opposite. Music travelled across oceans and centuries, connecting people who never met. Option C claims traditional music was eliminated, but it wasn't. It was transformed and combined with other traditions. The African rhythms survived inside every new genre they helped create. Option D, scientific discovery through experimentation, has nothing to do with this example. We're talking about cultural and artistic exchange, not laboratory science. Here's a WGU C100 OA exam tip for you. When a question describes art, music, or ideas travelling between cultures and coming back transformed, the answer is cultural exchange. Look for circular journeys where something leaves one culture and returns to it in a new form. Quick recall hook. Cultural exchange equals a circle. Africa to America and back again. Music travelling the world and coming home changed. You have reached the end of our first question set. For the free complete exam preparation, visit our website link in the description, where you find thousands more practice questions and comprehensive study guides. Thanks for studying with us today. See you in the next video.